I'd like to welcome everybody to the CCWD regular board meeting of Wednesday, December 12th. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Rebecca, you take roll, please.
Director Thomas.
I am here.
Director Davidson.
Here.
Director Cicada.
Here.
President Radcliffe.
Here. Okay, item 2 on our agenda is seating new board members, board reconstitution, and election of officers. Interim General Manager Jeffrey Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think that's the last day I could say that.
Yes.
Assuming there are changes. At this particular point, as you're right, we're going to do several things. New and re-elected board members are sworn in. New and elected and re-elected board members are seated. And that would be Director Thomas, Director Underhill, and Director Cicada. And then your board is going to elect a new president and vice president. And at that time, the new president may choose to appoint board members to the Engineering Committee, Finance Committee, and Legal Affairs Committee. These are standing committees of the board. However, the new president may want to delay making the appointments until January 9th meeting to canvass the preferences of each board member for those appointments. It is also customary at the next regularly scheduled board meeting for the newly elected president to make appointments to other committees and associations of interest to the agency, as well as to request a vote of the board with regard to the appointment of members to the Joint Powers Authority, of which the district is a member. Director Underhill, Director of District 3, will be reseated. Director Thomas of District 4 will be reseated, and Cindy Cicada, Director of District 2, will fill the position of Terry Strange. Directors Underhill, Thomas, and Cicada have taken and signed their oaths of offices. But I believe we do some more at this point. Is that true, Rebecca? Okay. I just want to kind of go over this in general so everybody's aware of it, especially the public. During the election of officers, I will take the gavel, and your board will then nominate both president and vice president. And then if, we can talk about committee appointments at that particular time. But again, it's up to the newly elected president to decide whether he or she would like to make appointments this meeting or defer it to January when he or she can get input from other board members. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Rebecca.
Okay, so Director Cicada, Director Thomas, and Director Underhill, please stand. Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Thomas, do solemnly swear
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
And the Constitution of the State of California.
And the Constitution of the State of California.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance.
To the Constitution of the United States.
To the Constitution of the United States.
And the Constitution of the State of California.
And the Constitution of the State of California.
That I take this obligation freely.
That I take this obligation freely.
Without any mental reservations or purpose of evasion.
Without any mental reservations or purpose of evasion.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge.
That I will well and faithfully discharge.
The duties upon which I am about to enter.
The duties upon which I am about to enter.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you and congratulations to all of you.
Okay, we're going to entertain motions for
or you're going
I
to do
get
it?
to do this.
Okay. My time is limited here, obviously.
Hey, buddy.
Okay.
Jeff, would you keep him in line?
I'm just looking at the clock. We got about 5 minutes.
Okay, now is the time of the year when the board elects its officers for 2019, the president and vice president. District policy also established that the terms of the office shall be for 1 year with the right of succession for 1 or more years. At this point, I will take nominations for president of the board.
I'd like to nominate Russ Thomas for president of the board.
I'll second that motion.
Okay? Nominated and second, nominated by Director Davidson, seconded by Director Cicada. Are there any other nominations?
I move we close the nominations for president.
So moved.
Second?
Okay. I jumped the gun, I apologize. Jeff, you're going to need to help me along here. I'm trying to expedite this. Okay.
Give me the gavel.
You just gave it up, sorry. Rebecca, can you please call roll? Take a roll call
Now, this is to close the nominations.
to close the nomination, Jeff.
Okay. Director Underhill?
Yes.
Director Thomas?
At the risk of sounding self-serving, yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Cicada?
Yes.
President Radman?
Yes.
Okay. With the nominations closed, we do take a vote at this time.
We did.
Now we vote for president.
Okay. Director Underhill?
Yes.
Director Thomas?
With the same disclaimer, yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Cicada?
Yes.
President Radman?
Yes.
Boy, that was close.
The new board president is Russ Thomas.
Okay, we're going to. We switched chairs.
Why? Do we have to? We have to.
And you should be getting
That's okay.
You should get a gavel here pretty soon.
That was, I'm gonna miss sitting next to her. Where's my chair?
At this time, I'd like to open up nominations for the office of vice president.
I move to nominate Bertha Underhill.
I'll second that motion.
There's a nomination and a second for Director Underhill to be vice president.
I move to close the nominations.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded to close the nominations. Rebecca, will you please?
Director Underhill?
Yes.
Director Radman?
Yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Cicada?
Yes.
President Thomas?
That sounds weird.
Okay. At this time, the nomination for vice president is Director Underhill. It's been moved and seconded. The nomination has been closed, and we now call for a vote.
Director Underhill?
Yes.
Director Radman?
Yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Cicada?
Yes.
President Thomas?
Yes.
By a motion of an approval of the board, Director Underhill is vice president.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Bertha.
Just like that.
I think she should move.
Do I have to give this back now?
I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
No glory in holding that thing.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. Okay, I've got I would call you the elder statesman of this group, but I know that's not true chronologically or annualized. But it pleases me that Jeff is here to kind of keep me on track, because Lord knows he was seldom on track. Just kidding. Okay, at this point on the agenda, we have public comment. At this time, any member of the public may address the board on non-agendized items only. The public is encouraged to work through staff to place items on the agenda for board considerations, and no action could be taken on any matter brought before us this morning on public comments. Do I see any public comments? Okay. Moving on to the consent agenda.
I move for acceptance of the consent agenda.
I'll second.
I'd like to pull item 4B for discussion. Secretarial fund.
Okay, these items normally are expected to be routine and non-controversial, but items can be pulled like Cindy has just pulled. You said it was 4B you want, Cindy?
Yes, I just have a couple of questions. I am new on the board, so bear with me. Perhaps in the future I can ask other questions offline.
Oh. Okay, all right. Any other items that anyone would like to pull? Okay, seeing none,
Hang on. You want to amend your motion?
Well, the
4A, C, D,
4A
and E?
is full. The new motion is to approve 4A, or amended the same motion to approve 4A, C, D, and E.
I'll second that.
all right, we have a motion for approval of the balance of the consent agenda. Will you take the roll?
We should read them all off first, though.
Read them all off? All right, well. Okay, we have 4A is approval of the minutes of the October 10th meeting. 4C is accepting the canvass and statement of results of the November 6th general election. 4D is approval of the write-off of uncollectible accounts receivable for the period of December 1st, 2017 to May 31st, 2018. And then finally, 4E, acceptance and transfer of La Cobra Mina, number 2, Water and Wastewater Services Facility Improvements. This is a project CCWD number 01596. Okay, so with those items covered by the motion, would you please take the roll?
Director Underhill?
Yes.
Director Adams?
Yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Sikkema?
Yes.
President Cobb?
Yes. Okay, those items are approved, and let's continue with discussion of 4B.
That would be me. I think my questions are just going to be some clarification.
Certainly.
So on page 1 of 8, under the dental and vision insurance for employees, that includes directors' benefits as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then on page 3, the card services for the Norton software virus protection for Lang. I'm just kind of curious, is that, well, I'm sure it is just one individual computer, and perhaps that is for Lang, and I don't know who that is.
That's for one of our employees,
Okay,
the laptop.
okay.
A number, especially those employees that are operators, have laptops and they take them home with them, and especially to be connected with SCADA.
Okay, I was just wondering if, since we have an IT services, if those particular products wouldn't be included, bundled for perhaps better pricing with all the other antiviruses that the other computers might have, so.
I will
I was
talk
just
to IT, and yes.
And then on the same page, the Columbia Communications Vehicle Cloud Service, what is that?
That's for our radio service, the radios that are in the individual trucks.
Okay, so radio communication.
Yes.
Okay. And then on page 4, for Data Pros, UB statement processing. How often is that billed? And that's for the monthly billing that goes out?
That is correct. It's a monthly billing that goes along with our statements.
Okay. And then right below that, the AutoCAD support services. Is that a annual fee for
Yes.
support? Okay. On page 6, on the top of the page, I'm looking at the life insurance, accidental death disbursement, that type of thing. And then right below it is, one is Mutual of Omaha, the other one is New York Life. So I'm kind of wondering, why are they separate?
If you look at the notation to the right of the New York Life,
Oh, I see that, that's right.
yes,
Got it. I knew that, but I still had it highlighted. And let's see. On page 7, Wage Works, what is that for? FSA admin?
that's for our, some of our benefits that we provide our employees. It's sort of like it's an account that employees can have to deduct from their wages to be able to pay for co-pays that are not covered by insurance, those type of things, that they're deducted from their wages, and it's a voluntary thing. And they can use it to cover whether it's childcare, whether it's expenditures not covered by insurance, those type of things. And that's provided pre-tax income. Or it's deducted from the employee's wages pre-tax, so it's long-term, it's a benefit to employees.
It's a flexible spending account, right?
There.
That's what I was looking for, thank you.
Okay. And then one other thing that I forgot to mention back here. Looks like a Ford Edge was purchased. Where is that?
An Escape.
It's back in the beginning.
Yes,
And so what department got that vehicle?
that's for pool use here at the district. We had surplus one of our pool vehicles, an older Dodge Caravan, and for this year's budget, we replaced it with an Escape.
Okay. All right, that's the end of my questions. Thank you.
Excuse me, now I have one. This is back on page 1. Of course, anything that says water, we are a member of, but representation at the American Water Works Association, is this primarily for department heads?
I'm sorry, which is the vendor?
American Water Works Association, we had membership dues of $4,000.
That's AWWA.
Right, right.
Yes, that covers generally our engineering staff and some of the field as well.
And none of the directors.
No. Well, it's a district-wide membership fee. And we have employees that go to some of their
Right, right.
conventions, actually serve on their board.
Oh, okay. I
Lo-
believe
regional, the West-
Teresa Tanaka used to do that.
Yes, and
when
Bill
she was
Cardinal
here.
as well.
Uh-huh. Okay. And who's our representative now, or do we have anyone? on-
Bill Cardinal does some representation on some of the regional, regional committees and the conferences. So he represents us.
Fine, thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, Jeff, I think it's kind of worthy of drawing attention to the fact that on page 6 of 8, if you first of all look at the total expenditures for the month, you'll see that they're about $1 million more than they normally are. But that large payment to R.E. Smith Contractors with its bracketed explanation, that's $1,075,000 for the month that's gone up, but that is going to be reimbursable.
Yes, up to 75% of that is going to be reimbursable. That's a grant project, partially grant-funded project that we have down at Jenny Lind.
Okay, all right, just want to point out that that's not going to be every month, month after month, that kind of expenditure, so. Okay, with that explanation, anybody from the public have any comments on this particular item?
Move for acceptance of 4B.
Second?
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Rebecca, would you take the roll, please?
Director Underhill?
Yes.
Director Redderman?
Yes.
Director Davis?
Yes.
Director Sikia?
Yes.
President Thomas?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to new business. We have a discussion and action item 5A to approve the agreement with Snowshoe Springs Association for wholesale treated water service. And we have Charles Palmer and Robbie Kramer making that presentation.
Good afternoon. So I think I was hoping to get through these items fairly quickly, if that suits the board members. And so just to get to the key points, Snowshoe Springs is a mutual water company up in the Ebbets Pass service area, and I do have a map here of the Snowshoe Springs service area. It's near Dorrington. It's wedged inside of the Big Trees Village community. That it's a separate.
Is that really the boundary?
What's that?
Is that really the boundary?
Yeah.
Huh.
It's perfectly rectangle. Yes.
We gotta hire that guy more often.
And so they have a fairly old water system with very small water lines. It just serves domestic water supply. There's no fire hydrants currently. So there's about 294 current residents in that service area. They are going out to get hopefully a USDA loan to replace their water system, put in, regular sized water mains, 6-inch, 8-inch water mains, and also adding fire hydrants. And so they're independently looking to get a USDA loan and independently fund that project. They're going to do it on their own. There's no relationship to CCWD for that particular effort. But one thing they do need what this agreement is about is upgrading their water service from their existing 2-inch meter that only supplies domestic demands to a 6-inch meter that will also supply the fire hydrants in their community as well as the previous domestic demands. So under the current, they do operate as an independent mutual water company, so they will continue to do their own operations and maintenance, their own leak repairs, their own sampling and reporting to the state under their own permit with the Division of Drinking Water, and their own meter reading and customer billing. The only difference, one other difference, is that they will be or have eliminated one of their redwood tanks they had up in the system. They lined it with a membrane, and the wood dried out, and eventually that just led to the failure of the tank. So that was in the past year. So so they are looking to rely more upon our tanks 4 and 5 for both their domestic demands and also the fire water storage. So in the map here does show kind of the proximity of where tank 4 and 5 is. Tank 4 and 5 is to their community there. And one thing also to mention is that we are going to be, we realize that for our own customers' benefit, we need to replace these redwood tanks at Big Trees 4 and 5 and make some other upgrades in the Big Trees Village area, including some pump station upgrades. So long-term, those will be our goals. And we have already submitted an application with FEMA through Cal OES to try to get some grant funds to aid with that project, because it is a wildfire area and the tanks are vulnerable to wildfire. So we have that opportunity. And so I did want to just talk a little bit about the process. Snowshoe Springs staff approached us with their proposal, and it was a good cooperation between both parties. And we do have a representative here from Snowshoe Springs Board of Directors that may want to provide comment. And that pretty much summarizes my presentation. So.
Any comments from the board?
Well, as Charles mentioned, we were approached, and this has been we've established steady dialogue, and we have had a series of meetings with Snowshoe Springs, and we know that we can't exist with these redwood tanks forever. They're getting drier and drier.
Right.
And so this is perfect timing to come into CCW, and we've seen this throughout Ebbets Pass. different of these homeowners associations coming in and banding together and asking CCWD, can we help? And we certainly are, you know, we're not out soliciting, but we're saying, yes, we're here to help you if you want to join. And that was, you know, the situation. So I'm very pleased to be able to welcome Snowshoe Springs.
And, you know, if there's any question about, basically, the way, I forgot to mention, the way we calculated the capacity fee. There's a capacity fee associated with going from a 2-inch meter to a 6-inch meter. We just simply took what we normally charge for a 2-inch meter and subtracted it from what we would charge for a 6-inch master meter. We took the difference, and then based on current capacity fee rates in Evans Pass area, that was the basis of our calculation.
So that was one of my questions, is the fee is changing from a 2-inch to a 6-inch for, the other question I had is about engineering and how this works. The current size of tanks 4 and 5 is what?
They are about just under 100,000 gallons each.
Okay.
There's also another tank 8, further up in the system that does supply some of those customers, but it's in a different pressure zone, so it's not readily available to the folks.
And that's a current size?
Correct.
Okay, and we're going, when we replace those redwood tanks, they're gonna be larger, about the same size?
You know, it's somewhat contingent upon funding, but yeah, our goal would be to try to, and site constraints, but you know,
Okay.
so our goal would be to try to get more storage on that site as much as possible.
Okay, so Snowshoe Springs is putting in, fire hydrants for, and which are, God forbid, we don't have to use them, but in the event that, that we do have to use them, the CCWD customers, which are all the way around that rectangle, will also be having to use it at the same time. And if that, and I know the 6-inch meter is gonna be used, or gonna be needed only in that occurrence, that those fire hydrants are gonna be needed. What does that situation look like if there is a fire there and the fire hydrants are needed in Big Trees Village and Snowshoe Springs at the same time? How long, is there any calculations that go into that?
That, I would just suggest that, you know, you're talking about 2 different types of fire. You're talking about a structure fire versus a wildfire. I'm not saying that fire hydrants may not be employed or folks aren't gonna turn on their household faucets and start watering stuff down. So yeah, it's the more the better, you know, obviously, because you have these additional scenarios that are very challenging to kind of engineer. But typically, we're just looking at a residential fire and residential, you know, so when you go out to get insurance, you know, when the Insurance Institute comes around and rates neighborhoods for insurance rates, they're gonna look at your water system and determine if you can put out a structural fire as far as from fire hydrants. So, I mean, they probably do some calculation for wildfires separately, but we're looking at more at the residential.
No, and you've kind of answered my question already. Okay.
Of course, you know all about insurance.
No, I knew about the
Yeah.
value of having fire hydrants in your neighborhood and getting insurance because of that. But no, you answered my question about wildfire versus,
Okay.
they wouldn't be needed in the event of a wildfire, in most cases, I'm gonna guess.
And,
Right.
and we're talking also about ISO ratings, ISO 2.
It's the same,
Yeah.
yeah, it's the same thing, insurance benefits.
So, yes, it's, and, you know, I'll be coming back to the board with the capital improvement program early next year. So I'll take another look at this area, and I did last year as well already, but I'll just, you know, take another look at it. And yeah, I mean, between the pump stations, the pipelines, and the storage, you know, we want to be able to have a very strong and robust system that is capable, you know.
Whereabouts on our timing list are the replacement of those tanks right now?
Well, we have the application in with Cal OES. My understanding is that the board adopted the hazard mitigation plan, so, that should put us in a good position for Cal OES and FEMA to respond to our application.
So most likely 2019, 2020?
I would expect 2019,
Okay,
we'll hear something.
great. Thank you.
Charles, going from a 2-inch meter up to a 6-inch, if those redwood tanks aren't replaced, is that going to pose a problem, change those meter sizes, if they're not replaced in a timely fashion or not replaced at all? Would it cause any other concerns?
They've been drawing off of those tanks. It's just a matter, internally, they had a redwood tank that the theory was that it was providing some capacity and some, especially like in peak demands or in fire, they don't really have fire hydrants at this time, but if they were to put in more storage there, it could supply the fire hydrants.
Okay, so if we don't get them replaced in a timely fashion, is that going to be an issue, having them changed sooner, prior to the tanks being replaced?
All I could say is that all our other customers are in the same situation. So the customers on those tanks are 80% CCWD customers, 20% Snowshoe Spring customers. So, I would say right now it's meeting the bare minimum requirement, but, being that the redwood tanks are vulnerable to fire, and some of the pump stations have low capacity, that I would just suggest in future capital improvement programs that we look at that area and try to improve the infrastructure. Just
Jeff?
No, I
Okay.
mean, this doesn't fix everything, and it's not gonna get fixed overnight, and,
Right.
but it's an improvement, and the redwood tanks are something that we, we'll go out and seek grant for, to replace them, just like we have been. It's just a step forward.
Absolutely.
That, your comment about the fact that they put in a liner and it caused the wood to dry out and start leaking more, that's kind of like an aha moment for me. I mean, I guess I've always known that the redwood tanks don't work well unless they have water inside, but if the water's not reaching the surface of the wood, who would have thought?
I may have just kind of interjected some of my own opinion.
Oh.
But you had an expert come up and explain what went wrong with the tank. Am I correct, or did I misspeak?
Say it again.
That basically the fact that the wood was not in contact with water, the wood dried out and.
That was one tank,
One
this
tank.
line,
Uh-huh.
and I think we just got bad advice a number of years ago. And so there's been some rot between the wall and the liner. But it should be added that historically our system is entirely gravity fed. And so, in a real way, staying in the tank business is pretty redundant for us. And it's almost, I guess, effectively impossible for us to have enough tank capacity, even with new tanks, to meet the usage, emergency usage, and fire requirements to maintain the hydrants. So that's pretty much why we came to you guys for some assistance.
Okay, if there's no more discussion here, the chair entertains a motion.
Move
So
for,
moved.
okay, I'll second that motion.
I didn't hear you, Bertha.
I move to adopt the resolution approving the agreement with Snowshoe Springs Association for wholesale treated water service.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any public discussion on this?
Well, would you,
May I?
Oh,
certainly.
yeah, I was a little slow on.
And it has nothing to do with CCWD. They were nice to me. This is all self-imposed.
Okay, what is your name, sir?
My name is Richard Mates. I'm the president of the board of directors for Snowshoe Springs Association, and which is also a mutual benefit water distribution company incorporated in the state of California. I would like to keep a couple brief comments. We started this project with CCWD and the USDA a little over a year ago. At about 4 o'clock this afternoon, we will finish all of the things necessary to satisfy USDA to go ahead with a loan and a grant. And so it's a big day for me because I've been the sort of the headliner in this project. But what I'd like to do is say that to you, the board of CCWD, how pleased we are with the cooperation that we received from the staff. Jeff Meyer, Charles, Robbie, I don't believe is here, Robbie Kramer, and Dave Egerton, when he was here, set the tone that was one of cooperation and appreciation on our part. So I just would like to congratulate you on having what I consider to be a wonderful staff. We've certainly had our differences, and all the differences have been resolved without a harsh word and with smiles, and I appreciate that very much. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you for
Good to
that,
hear.
Richard.
Thank you.
That's Dakota, did you get that? Okay, are there any other public comments? Okay, Rebecca, would you take the roll, please?
Director Underhill?
Yes.
Director Retterman?
Yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Cicada?
Yes.
President Thomas?
Yes. Okay, the next,
Now something might happen at 4 o'clock.
okay, on, continuing on, we have a presentation from Charles on a memorandum of understanding between Calaveras Unified School District and the Calaveras County Water District to provide sewer service to the Jenny Lind Elementary School. Go ahead.
So, yeah, again, I'll try to make this as brief as possible. So this is about a memorandum of understanding between the Calaveras Unified School District and CCWD to provide sewer service for the Jenny Lind Elementary School. So the key points here, so the school has its own existing on-site wastewater treatment system down in Jenny Lind for the elementary school, and it's, reached the end of its life cycle. So we're fortunate to be able to likely get Clean Water State Revolving Fund grant funds to replace the system. And they looked at different alternatives to replacing the system, and one of them was potentially connecting to our sewer system in La Cantena. And so what that would look like is it would be a force main from Jenny Lind School down near Baldwin Street, and it'd be it's 17,900 foot force main, connects in at Vista del Lago, and then through our existing sewer system gets over to the wastewater plant. And the school district, along with retained Weber Gio and also Castle Consulting Engineers, they prepared a tech memo, evaluating these alternatives and further evaluating the alternative connecting to CCWD system. So we looked at, they recommended, so there's issues of capacity fees and bi-monthly rates. So, we looked at, the recommended, so there was a proposed design flow, and that we based the capacity fees on that. And then I went back and looked at, historically what some of their sewer use has been, requested that information. And so we could tailor their bi-monthly rates more to focus on what they're actually using at this time. And the capacity fees allow them some opportunity in the future if they want to, increase enrollment at the school, that those capacity fees will already have been paid, and the school district won't have to come back and pay additional fees at that time.
Are we allowed to do that?
Who's
Who's to say what the,
that's kind of a negotiation
Basically a
with,
prepay, you know, I don't believe we allow anybody else to do anything like that.
well, when you go and apply for a Clean Water State Revolving Fund, there is a certain amount of future growth they'll allow.
Okay.
So,
I'm asking, does our district allow it?
All right.
I'd have to look into that. I'm not aware of any restrictions on that. I mean, if,
Well, I mean, my point is, and certainly I'm not trying to nix this, I'd like to see it move forward, but I believe our rules are that if you don't have a project, you can't purchase capacity for some future date, because we want people that are actually gonna be, you know, on the system. I mean,
well, it's a design, the capacity fee is based on the engineer's report. That's the design flow they recommended. So, I mean, when I did the bi-monthly fees, I'm trying to tailor to more closely to what they're actually using because, you know, I don't want to be overcharging them on their bi-monthly fees. So the problem is if, you know, what happens if a year from now they go over what capacity fees they paid, then we'd have to, you know, we can review non-residential accounts every 2 years and make adjustments. So, you know, we wouldn't want, you know, they'll build the project.
I don't think you can do it every 2 years.
Well, according,
It just brings back the point that we talked about the engineering committee meeting. We really need to have another, have a study session at the engineering committee and then bring it to the board and talk about, you know, commercial capacity fees, how they're figured and how we're going to go ahead when we do these sewer master plans and maybe take a look because of this, the changes in use and such. So, I mean, I'm just bringing it up as an example, but I don't believe that, that another developer, I understand having room in their grant, and that makes perfect sense that they make sure that they're not getting too little because they're only gonna get one bite at this grant. But I just want to make sure that our policy jives with this.
right, and
Allows it to occur.
yeah, I mean, I can speak more on with the Clean Water State Revolving Fund because I've, you know, and they consider this a regionalization project, so they like the idea of eliminating these small wastewater systems and eliminating the additional permitting that the state has to do to regionalize projects. So, you know, there's different ways you can look at this from an engineering standpoint. I mean, we could, you know, the capacity fee goes towards improvements to our system. You know, so sometimes if we were to, let's say we were to lower the capacity fee, I may have to reassess the situation and say, hey, you know, we can't move this project forward because we're short on capital funds to do improvements that we need to make sure we can adequately serve them. So, you know, that's, whereas this is an unusual project. It is, you know, it's outside of our normal service area, in a fairly long distance outside of our, you know, service area. So the district's taking on a lot of future liability to operate and maintain this system. So I think that the trade-off is that the district needs to make sure we're adequately covered in bringing those facilities into our system.
Okay.
Because if I do remember, this is one of our higher growth areas.
It is one of our higher growth areas.
So that we're perfectly situating ourselves to, you know, to provide service for our new
Right.
customers.
We even, the staff at Castle and the Calaveras Unified School District, you know, we had questions, well, okay, if we wanted to purchase some additional land for spray fields, let's say, would the state revolving fund be able to pay those charges? And if the timing was right and, you know, we hadn't purchased that property, then they could pay part of those funds. So, you know, I think they just have to, you know, you have to just have a reasonable approach and go to the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and present what you're asking for and see, you know, if it's their staff there is.
So
will accept it.
we've done that, or we're going to do that? I mean, we have a master plan,
Right.
so I mean, I assume that we would do that with them and see, well, look, these are the components, this is our planning schedule based on, connections. What fits in, we've done that, or we will do it?
We will do that, yeah, we're kind of halfway through the process. I mean, they're, the Calvert, the
They need
school district.
they need our authority to go forward, and then they'll finalize it,
Correct,
and
yeah,
we'll be a part of that.
right. So they're finalizing their application, they're still working on the environmental. So, we've done these applications before too, so it's like a 4-component application. And so then they'll submit it, and then that's the opportunity for, after you submit the application, that's the opportunity for the engineers and owners to discuss the project with the Clean Water State Revolving Fund staff.
One other question in regards to their athletic fields, which is, I believe, currently being irrigated with the recycled water from their plant. What's their plan on increased use and of domestic water supply on those fields? Is that part of this, or is it just, we're just discussing sewer?
We've just been discussing sewer. I mean, we could follow up on that item. We have this particular item is a memorandum of understanding, and there's some issues about resolving the final, after we start to implement service, what are the conditions of service? So, that is potentially another discussion we can have at that time.
Well, I'm sure it's in here, I've just briefly looked it over, and I agree with the capacity fee. That's kind of, that was only off in my head by 1.5 when I figured it, but I just, the potential increase in domestic water usage on the athletic field is something that I think needs to be at least considered, because they may not have the infrastructure in place to service that. I doubt they do. There would have to be, and that would be on theirs, but, I'm not exactly sure how where CCWD serves water, domestic water into that, but it still needs to get down to the athletic fields or the. So
Sure. They are our water customer, so we can, we have all the records on that. So, if we see an increase in, a dramatic increase in water service that's above and beyond what other customers with an equally sized meter would be using, then,
Well, I just would like it addressed, because I hate to have them come back and, it looks to me like their peak demand is 7,500 gallons a day. So if they're not gonna spray the recycled water, all the 7,500 gallons that they're spraying at the sewer plant, or that they say they're treating, theoretically, all of that has to go on those ball fields. So I see it increasing by 7,500 right off the bat.
Mhm.
So it's just something to keep your eye on.
Okay, Jeff, you expressed some concerns at the engineering meeting about whether the pipe would have sufficient capacity to serve customers, future potential customers along Berkesee.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that now, or?
No, it's just, I still have the same, there is a route, there's a map here that goes down Berkesee for primarily, and a few other spots. And while we're certainly not looking, absolutely, we're not looking to expand sewer service into Rancho Calaveras. We have no desire to do that whatsoever. But there may be people along the route that currently can't get a septic system on because of some water issues, floodplain issues.
Sure.
So we were just gonna hope that we were gonna design this with the capacity and look at several areas to see if there was a need to make sure that we had capacity in line if somebody else wanted to connect up in that vicinity. But it certainly is not, we're not going out, trying to say that we want to serve Rancho with sewer service. We don't want to do that, but there may be some that.
Right, yeah, it will have a little bit of additional capacity, and the intent was that, folks along, next to and immediately adjacent to the alignment would have potentially the ability to connect into it. It depends a little bit on the type of engineering you do on it. If it's, a high-pressure force main, probably not. If it's a lower-pressure force main, it might work.
Yeah, that was my question about how exactly that works from a technical standpoint. If you have a pressurized system going by, sewer lines are typically just flow downhill type of an apparatus, but how do you get your effluent from your house into a, whether it's high pressure or low pressure? You have to have a grinder pump or something to?
Right, so they have what they call, and this wasn't, elaborated too much, but my proposal, and I need to talk to the engineers a little more, we haven't gotten a final design yet, but
Okay.
you can do something, what's called a low-pressure sewer system, which all the lots are pumped, they all pump into a low-pressure line that will convey the sewage forward, but, you can't really do that on a high-pressure line, because there's a lot of, it's infeasible from the standpoint that every single house would have to have a high-pressure pump, and, you also would have issues with potential backflow of a high-pressure sewer line into residential units. So, from those reasons and probably others, you wouldn't want to do a high-pressure sewer line that had individual lots connected to it.
Okay, thanks. One last question from me anyway. At 17,900 feet, that is really very, very close to the length of the water line that was proposed, designed by the district years ago for Coppertown Square. And we're not here to talk about Coppertown Square, of course, but.
That's not agendized.
Well, I know, but I'm prefacing my comment. That pipe never got installed because of the phenomenon that if, with such a long pipe and limited capacity flow, that the material would become a septage in the pipe. I'm concerned whether you thought about it, whether during, certainly in periods of use when school is in session, that there would be no possibility of that. But what about in the summertime when there's no school and relatively little flow? Has that been thought about?
The idea was to remove the solids by either screening or by, large commercial septic tanks, one or the other, to remove the solids. So it's more like an effluent system, similar to what we have up in West Point.
Or 6 Mile Village or something?
Correct.
Similar, okay. All right, well, that explains it.
I just have one more. How do you decommission an existing wastewater plant? I mean, throw things in it or?
Just turn off the switch.
Well, in this case, you're gonna put portable classrooms probably right on top of it. Or a playground area or something. They're limited in space down there.
Yeah, the designers will put together a demolition plan, but yeah, you would basically remove all the surface equipment from the site, especially since you're on a school district property.
Right,
anything
right.
potentially dangerous to children. And then as far as any open pits, obviously they've got to get some backfill material from some source to backfill those.
So they're gonna be asking for anyone who wants to dump dirt.
Possibly, yeah.
Don't we have some excess dirt at the Jenny Lynn's treatment site?
Maybe we should think about that as far as.
Are you ready for a motion?
I am. Well, yeah, I am. If no further discussion, we're ready for a motion.
Well, I make the motion, we adopt resolution 2018, what number? 72, approving the memorandum of understanding between Calaveras Unified School District and Calaveras County Water District to provide sewer service to Jenny Lind Elementary School.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any public comment on this item?
We did have Hugh Logan and Joe Cruz here. Maybe one of them would like to speak.
Sure.
Come forward, please.
All the technical stuff sounds like it's really taken care of, so I appreciate that. Wanted to let you know the Unified School District voted last night at their board meeting to ratify. They were very appreciative of the collaboration. I heard that word earlier with the staff over the past 6 months or so in developing the memorandum of understanding. We're at the end of the planning phase, So there'll be a construction application that will move forward, and this MOU allows us to move forward with the SRF to get to a construction funding application. We're considered severely disadvantaged, which is
Oh,
really good
great.
for funding.
Yeah.
And so we're hoping to get that 100% funding secured sometime in the spring of next year. And we'll be back through the engineering team to update you. So
What area is severely disadvantaged down there?
less than 60% of median household income in California. So, and
No, I know, but what's the boundary that you're including?
the SRF folks established their policy and said since it's a school and the ratepayers are students, they have no ability to repay, is how they defined it. And so since,
So that's like, if we had a prison in the county too, we could get some extra money.
well, if they had a wastewater plant. So when it came to wastewater funding, that's how they did that. And it works out well because there are a lot of
Yeah,
disadvantaged kids that attend the school.
so that's great.
And certainly the school district as a whole had no capital funding to move forward.
Yeah.
So on behalf of this school district, wanted to say thank you to Charles and the team for presenting things.
Let me just ask one other question. What was your title?
I'm a consultant to Joe Cruz and the school superintendent, but,
You work for who? Castle or?
no, I have my own business, Utility Capital Solutions. My full-time job, so this is a part-time gig to help the school district out. My full-time job, I'm the manager of the San Andreas Sanitary District in San Andreas. But
Okay.
that's my full-time
Just
gig.
out of curiosity, whoever wants to answer it, are you guys considering doing the same with Toyon? I know they have the same issues.
Toyon is, we also are doing a planning grant through the SRF. There's no one to regionalize with. We look, both directions, and there's no feasible pipeline to put in. So we are improving that facility and trying to simplify it. Currently, it's a Class 3 plant, very complicated to run and very difficult to staff with a Grade 3 operator. So we're hoping to simplify that to a Class 1 facility, put in some new technology for some underground drip systems and whatnot.
Yeah,
So-
it's really unfortunate that because the Toyon area in particular is a highly industrial zoned area that would benefit from regionalization or its own independent sewer facility that maybe could piggyback with you guys or with the district. It's
We
a
agree.
shame. It's kind of just a little too far in every direction, but.
It's just kind of out in the middle of nowhere there, and it's hard to find a central plant.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the education on how they came to, the state and their infinite wisdom came to the disadvantaged community designation. But that is very interesting to learn. Students don't make much money at that age, no.
Well, they could always issue promissory notes or something.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion from the public? Okay, if not, Rebecca, would you take the roll, please?
Director Underhill?
Yes.
Director Radigan?
Yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Sinclair?
Yes.
President Thomas?
Yes. Okay, moving on to item 5C. We have a presentation of the audited financial statements for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2018 by Richardson and Company LLP.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, members of the board. Brian Nash of Richardson and Company will present to you their findings of the annual financial audit. This is ending for the period ending June 30th, 2018. This is the third year of working with Richardson and Company, and with Brian, they've done a fantastic job. We've been very pleased with the cooperative nature and also their input. It's been invaluable as we move on through our assessment of separating the water fund from the sewer fund and how we identify costs, and also when we looked at the Public Financing Authority for the REACH 3A. So their services have been invaluable. As part of the presentation, I'm going to be supplying you copies of management letters that is directed to the Board of Directors. And at this point, I'd like to introduce Brian Nash of Richardson and Company. Thank you, Brian.
Welcome, Brian.
Good afternoon. So you should have several things from us. Passed out an agenda that just outline of what's covered in these other documents. You should have a draft of the audited financial statements and 2 letters from us. One of the letters is addressed to the Board of Directors and Management, We call that the management letter. It has some recommendations in it. And then there's a second letter that's addressed just to the board of directors, and that's a letter of required disclosures to the governing body under audit standards. And my oral presentation will cover both of those letters. So Jeff's given a good introduction. This is our third year. I know you have a new director this year, and so if you have any questions, I was going to keep my presentation brief because I know you have a full agenda today from what I understood. So any questions you have, we'll be happy to go into more detail, and stop me at any time. So what you pay us for is our opinion. We provide an opinion on the water fund, the sewer fund, the public finance authority fund, and agency fund. So you take care of some special district accounting, and we provide an opinion on that. The opinions are clean. There's no modifications of our opinion. One thing that's new, if you did look at our opinion, is there's what's called an emphasis of a matter, and that is a paragraph in the opinion that refers a reader to something important in the footnotes, and that is the implementation of Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement Number 75. That's the one I've been mentioning the last couple of years related to post-retirement health care benefits. So the accounting change for the post-retirement health care benefits, and there was a restatement in the financial statements to record the full liability that existed instead of the way that it was accounted for before, under Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statements 45, which was if you didn't pay your required annual contribution, you start recording a liability over time in the future. So that was a new statement that was implemented that created a restatement. So our opinion refers to that. Some required disclosures here real quick. The scope of our audit was consistent with the engagement letter. We had no difficulties encountered during the audit. No disagreements with management, no major issues discussed with management prior to our attention, such as a certain accounting result that they wanted. No consultations with other auditors. There's one thing we still have left to do, which is a single audit. A single audit is a compliance audit of federal money. So the Jenny Lynn treatment plant had some federal money that went to it. And so we're going to do a compliance audit that's not due until March 31st. We thought it was better to get this behind us, and then we'll work on that after the first of the year when we slow down a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to point you to the financial statements. I'm going to point out a few things. One of the things I always mention is there's what's called management's discussion and analysis, which is an executive summary of the financial statements. If you wanted to get a quick overview of the financial statements, it starts at page 3. And so I'd start there and read that. You'll see the major changes and discussion by management of what happened. I'm going to refer you to page 13 and 14, the balance sheet for the proprietary funds. One of the things that changed this year due to the rate study is there was a split of the shared fund. So you're seeing a water fund, a sewer fund, a public financing authority fund. But the shared costs, the costs that are not direct to the water or sewer funds, are kept in a shared fund. And the split of that changed from 74-26 water and sewer to 73-27. So the sewer took a little larger percentage of that. That was based on the study that came out during your rate study process last year. So that was something that caused a little bit of extra work during the audit to get everything to line up with those new percentages, but just wanted to mention that. You'll see that the balance sheet is organized with restricted assets in non-current assets. So those are from your expansion fees and R&R fees. And those increased a little bit, you'll see, from 24 to 25.6 million. So those not as much expenses there as the revenue you received. You will notice, though, as I get to page 14, the unrestricted net position declined, even though your restricted assets increased. There is a borrowing from the sewer fund to the water fund that we discussed in the past. There was a structural deficit. The sewer fund has been running at a deficit. And so it has, when we start the audit, negative cash. The negative cash is an indication there's a borrowing. So the sewer fund's been borrowing from the water fund. And I understand that it increased to 1.12 million during the year that we just got through auditing, June 30, 18. And I understand that's been addressed in the rate study. So I know there's new rates for the sewer fund, so that should help. And there's also a plan to pay that back over 10 years with interest. So Jeff confirmed that started in 18-19. There's already been the first payment.
Yes.
That's been made on that. So that was important because those two funds have restricted monies in the funds. So the water rates can't be used to pay sewer expenses, and the sewer rates really can't be spent on water expenses. And so a borrowing without paying any interest is really not something that's allowable. So that's been taken care of. If you look at the Public Financing Authority Fund, you'll see the balance sheet is blank. I just wanted to point this out. The asset side of the balance sheet is blank because the fixed assets that were in there, the assets that were purchased with the USDA loan were transferred to the water fund during the year. So it doesn't have the assets, but on page 14 it still has the liability, the loan that exists. So because it doesn't have any assets, because those are transferred to the water fund, and it still has a liability, it has a deficit of net position, 2.5 million on the bottom of page 14. OPEB liability, the post-retirement health care liability that was recorded, it's 6.66 million. So in the past, there was an asset because the district had always paid its annual required contribution for the post-retirement health care benefits. So the way the old accounting worked, you didn't have any liability, you actually had an asset because you paid a little bit extra. You pre-funded some payments into a trust with PARS. So now with the new accounting, the full liability that exists is now on the balance sheet. So that was 6.6 million. The pension liability increased from 8.8 million to 10.24 million. And that was largely because CalPERS is reducing its discount rate. So the way that the liability is computed for pension is they schedule out all the future payments, and then they use a discount rate to discount it back to present value at the current year. And if you have a lower discount rate, the liability goes up. So they changed the discount rate from 7.65% to 7.15%. And they've already indicated they're going to reduce it again in the future. They're trying to get it down to 7%. So there'll be one more of those changes. So that change caused the liability to increase. So you'll see on the bottom of page 14, there's a deficit in the sewer fund of unrestricted net position. You'll see there's restricted money there, there's 8 million, but there's also the unrestricted money, the unrestricted net position is a deficit. And that increased from 1.35 million to 4.2 million, despite all of your efforts with the rate study. And that's largely because of this recording of this GASB statement 75 that increased your liability for the pension, the OPEB, the post-retirement health care benefits. So that's showing up there in the unrestricted net position. The unrestricted net position in the water fund also declined quite a bit because of that. Briefly on the income statement, page 15. Revenues were pretty flat, but you'll notice the expenses went up quite a bit. Expenses increased 10.8%, and that was also related to the changes in the post-retirement health care benefits and pension liability. So there was a pre-funding payment to the trust for OPEB of $694,000, and then because the liability increased for pension, that impacted expenses. That was 1.4 million. So without those two changes, everything else declined overall. So the pension and post-retirement health care benefits had quite of an impact this year in 18. You'll see at the bottom of the income statement, there's a transfer that is the fixed assets being moved from the Public Financing Authority Fund to the Water Fund. It's around $4 million. That's what that is. Okay. Then the restatement shows up at the bottom of page 15. It was 5.2 million in the water fund and 1.8 million in the sewer fund. That's recording the beginning of the year amount for post-retirement health care benefits. So the way the accounting standards work, you change your financial statements to show as if that statement's been in existence all along. And that's the restatement to get it recorded. Income or footnotes, I'd like to just point out a couple things in the footnotes. The footnotes start on page 19. One of the things we disclose in the footnotes, most of them are pretty similar to last year. On page 33, the board has some reserves, and you'll see there's a table at the top of page 33 that lists out all of the reserves that the board has on the right-hand side as approved. And then on the left-hand side, it shows what could be funded with the unrestricted net position that the district actually had. And so some of the water fund reserves could be funded, but none of the sewer reserves could be funded. There's a footnote describing the restatement. It's one of the last footnotes on page 41 that describes the amount that we recorded to implement the GASB statement number 75. In the back of the report, there's also debt service coverage ratios. There's supplementary information that we disclose, and it shows that the debt service coverage ratios are doing fine, well above what their requirement is. So now I'd like to move on to the management letter. So there's nothing new in the management letter. When we first came in and did your audit, we had quite a few recommendations. A lot of those have been implemented. There were a couple of our recommendations implemented this year. One of the recommendations we had last year was to bill the grants more timely, and that did happen in the June 30, 18 year. The USDA grant it really carried out until well after year end, and didn't get billed until the spring, but in 18 all of the grants were billed before we started our audit, so that was a big improvement. So we removed that comment. And there was also some progress in documenting procedures. There's still a couple of procedures that need to be documented, but there's been some progress there. So the importance of that is if you have turnover in your accounting staff, there'll be some documentation that can be followed by the people that follow them. So some progress was made there. There's still a couple more areas to work on. Now, because there's nothing new, I wasn't going to go over each one, but I know now there's a new board member. I could go into more detail if you'd like me to.
I'm okay either way.
Okay. So one of the things we're supposed to point out is estimates. So what numbers are estimated in the financial statements? The fair value of investments, the allowance for uncollectible receivables, the determination of qualifying expenses under the grants, depreciable lives used to depreciate capital assets, the computation of the post-retirement healthcare benefits liability and pension liability. Those are based on actuarial valuations. Those are estimates. And as far as audit adjustments went, the change in the split between the water and the sewer fund caused a lot of noise in our audit. We had some closing entries for that. Closing out of the assets out of the Public Financing Authority fund, we had a few adjustments and some reclassifications for reporting purposes. We would like to see the number of adjustments, closing entries decline a little bit, but overall the accounting's pretty high quality. So with that, that's my formal presentation. I'd be happy to go into more detail if you'd like me to.
Okay, any questions?
I do. Maybe Jeff, could you comment on just on some of the recommendations that have been presented, and you did say that some of them have been implemented that were recommended for last year. Some of them are still here. I do see that there's reasons might be reasons why they haven't been addressed. and maybe we're in the process of addressing some of them, or maybe there's no need to make any changes. Well, one of them I saw was cash receipts, that no change has been made in posting cash receipts because the amount is not significant. What is that approximate dollar amount?
When you're looking at whether it's material or not, and the grand scheme of things, part of this is staffing levels. Do we have enough staff to do complete separation of duties? And this is obviously cash receipts in the customer service department is what we're talking about. So do we have a cash drawer for each individual person? And in this particular case, we don't. It's a shared cash drawer. So there is a little bit of risk there. But we have fewer and fewer cash payments now coming in across the counter.
On a daily or weekly, I mean, what are we looking at? Less than
We could look at maybe less than $500 to $1,000 a week.
Okay, all right. No, that was my question.
Yeah.
Thank you. And some of the other ones that are on here, that's cash receipts. Down on page 2 of the management letter, is there an intent for staff to address some of the recommendations?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
And some of it is timing and staffing, but as far as Brian was talking about procedures, that's a big part of our focus, and also for payroll.
Okay, and in my mind, having an auditor come through and do this, and someone from outside looking at it, that seems to be the main purpose in my mind, is to have a fresh set of eyes taking a look at it, and even that's the reason for having a new auditor, to have the auditor be audited to see what they might have missed in the previous year. The recommendations that they make to the district seems very valuable and important to take a look at. And so if there's, are we gonna be able to hang on to these?
Yes.
Yeah. And I'd like to see it compare this year's to next year and see where we're at, and if they've been addressed, and maybe we can have a follow-up to this at maybe mid-year or the end of the fiscal year to see what in 6 months. Could that be something we could ask to have on our agenda maybe in a finance committee?
In a finance committee? Yes, and I would actually probably look at towards the end of the third quarter.
Okay.
Which would be March timeframe. That would give us a good idea, because when you hit the fourth quarter, you're already getting ready for the next year's audit.
Okay.
They're already they come visit us in May and June.
Well, more aggressive than I expected, so thank you.
Certainly.
What year of, I assume we had a multi-year contract with you? Do you know what year we're in?
We're in year 3, but there are options to extend it, and that's what, it is our desire amongst staff, with concurrence of the finance committee and then the full board, to look at extending it for 2 years. We have looked at really revamping our audit policy, which was basically one section, a couple sentences. We've taken it to the finance committee. They made recommendations. I've got to take it back to the finance committee for review again, and we'll bring it back to the full board in January. To be
I'd
honest,
like to have a new auditor every 4 years or so.
and that's within the time frame the finance committee was looking for.
And so we just talked about that 2 weeks ago?
Yes, they were looking at the 4 to 5 year time frame. One of the things you look for in switching auditors is the time to gear up and for them to learn you and you to learn them. And the timing with us and Brian's group, especially with the Public Financing Authority and the Reach 3A project, USDA, that really kind of muddied the waters, because there was so much focus on trying to get that done and all the adjusting entries which Brian was talking about. I think we've had discussions, and I think we're headed in the right direction to make things much cleaner as we move forward.
Can I just make a comment? I think you did do a response to the management letter last year. You should
Yes.
be able to find that and save you some time. Some of those things are already written up in there.
Thank you.
Okay, any other board questions? I do have a couple of questions that might reveal my lack of accounting acumen here, but looking at page 15, the
Okay.
top of the page, the statement of revenues and expenses, net position proprietary funds. I mean, this is talking about net loss from operations. And in 17, we had a net loss from operations of $6,300,000. In 18, $7,896,000. How are we keeping the doors open?
Well, that's very common because you'll see under non-operating, there's a lot of revenues that are used for your operations. This is more due to how it's presented than showing that there's a problem overall, because you'll see that you have property taxes show up as non-operating revenues because those don't come from customers. So you're looking at the section where it's showing, you know, how much comes from your customers directly versus all of your expenses. But then there's also taxes and other revenues that help pay for your operations.
Okay,
More of a
and,
presentation issue.
and you talked at length about this GASB Statement 75 that caused a $7 million swing just on the basis of approaching an assumption one way versus another.
Right.
Was that $7 million swing a portion of this indicated of a $7.8 million loss?
The current year change in the liability does affect the expenses. So I mentioned the expenses increased about 10%. And so between the $7.1 million that was on the restatement for OPEB and the amount that was there at the current year, there was an expense due to paying into the trust that exists. So that affected expenses, but not this change that you're seeing at the bottom of the page.
Okay, so I would take it that you think that extending your contract would not represent any kind of a risk for you then, so.
No, I'm not worried about your financial health long-term, especially
Okay.
with the new rate structure that you put into place.
Okay.
I think that really did need to be addressed for the sewer fund especially.
Yeah,
So hopefully that does take care of the issues and put you on track to be financially sound overall.
We tried to
But
do
the water
that.
fund's been fine ever since we started.
Okay, if there are no more board questions, how about public comments or questions from the public on this matter? Okay, seeing none, can we, I'd like to entertain a motion on this item.
I'll move to receive and file the audited financial statements for the fiscal year ending June 30th by the auditing firm of Richardson and Company,
I'll second
LLP.
that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on this item. Would you take the roll, please?
I'm sorry, I missed the second.
I did that.
You finally did something here.
Oh, no, I've done two of them.
Oh, okay.
But who's keeping track?
Oh, I
Hopefully Rebecca.
We have a scorecard.
Director Edelman?
Yes.
Director Rediman?
Yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Takeda?
Yes.
President Thomas?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, that concludes this item, and we would like to take a short break here, and I'd like to announce that the persimmon bars that are on the table were provided by my baker/wife.
It's not so bad.
How's your truck running?
Which one? I think I have a little bit broken.
You're $22,000. You're in charge. That's-
At least my ears are ringing.
I'd like to reconvene the meeting, please. Okay, moving on to item 5D. Okay, 5D is a discussion and action regarding the adoption of the 2018 McCollum, Amador, Calaveras Integrated Regional Water Management Plan update. This is by Peter Martin. Peter, you have a minute and a half.
That's my time there.
He asked for it.
Thank you, President Thomas, board members. So this is kind of the culmination of some work that's been done within the MAC-RWM region over the last 6 months or so. I did have a couple slides to orient our new board member as to what the McCallum Amador Calaveras RWM region is. Essentially, it's the Calaveras and McCallum watersheds within the Amador, Calaveras, and Alpine counties. That's sort of the region and that's captured in that RWM. So just to talk to you a little bit, give you an overview of the participants in the MAC RWM region. Essentially, you have the Upper McCallum River Watershed Authority, or UMRA, acting as the regional water management group on behalf of the IRWM, which is required by DWR for an IRWM, Integrated Regional Water Management Group. And that is made up of Alpine County, the counties, Calaveras counties, Amador County, and then also the water agencies within those counties, in addition to East Bay Mud. So, and so the Calaveras entities are CCWD, Calaveras Public Utility District, and in Amador you have Jackson Valley Irrigation District and Amador Water Agency. So in 2016, the Department of Water Resources updated their standards for IRWM plans. And there was quite a few different additional requirements on those plans that required updates. And so the focus of this effort has been mainly to meet those new requirements that were put forth in 2016. And also that's required as part of allowing for those entities to remain eligible for funding under Prop 1 or other funding mechanisms in the future, perhaps. So this also provides an opportunity for you to revisit your plan, incorporate any new information, in addition to taking a fresh look at the projects that are listed in the plan as well. So I provide some excerpts in your board packet, but today I just wanted to highlight some of the 4 projects that were included in this plan, which required sort of a resubmission of those projects with new criteria. I worked with Joel Metzger to resubmit all those projects and include an additional one as well. So first project for CCWD is the Sheep Ranch Drinking Water Treatment and Distribution Compliance Project. That's looking at upgrades to the existing treatment facilities. There's sort of a older pressure filter at Sheep Ranch that could do with bringing it into the new century, I suppose. So there's that, and it would improve efficiency and also provide some redundancy, which Division of Drinking Water really likes. And then also some upgrades to the distribution system there to meet fire flow standards and advance any sort of wildfire resiliency in that area. As you remember, in the Butte fire, that tank was completely drained, putting those folks out of water for a few days after they came back. It took a while for us to bring that online. There's some opportunities to create some improvements there as well. Another project is the West Point Automated Meter Reading Project. We've looked at trying to incorporate automatic meter reading in all of our service areas. West Point would make a good piloted project for radio reads, whereby you sort of have a vehicle that can move through the system and pick up those reads from the individual meters. And so we had put in an application to submit for possible grant funds associated with that. The third project is the West Point Water Treatment Plant Drinking Water Compliance Project. That is not a new project. It's been in the plan in the past. That's mostly associated with getting a redundant filter up in West Point. We've been asked by the Division of Drinking Water in the past to come up with a plan to come up with a more redundant system. So if one filter goes down in an emergency, or perhaps you need to take it down for maintenance, there's an easier pathway to have that redundancy in place for the filters. So you have 2 filters side by side, or perhaps some other configuration. And then additionally, there's some capacity that would be improved by having that redundancy and that additional capacity in another filter for perhaps additional fire flows. And then lastly, this is a new one that was added in, which is essentially a planning grant proposal for a meadow restoration project upstream of Wilson Dam, looking at sort of the permitting pathways, any environmental and an implementation plan to put in a meadow restoration project upstream of there. As you know, last month, I believe, I brought forth the West Point Water Master Plan update, which showed that Wilson Dam is provide no additional benefit to supply in that system. And so once that plan is approved, it would show that basically the recommendation is to remove Wilson Dam at some point. So that planning study is estimated at just under $300,000. So finally, as I mentioned, there was several stakeholder meetings, and the Regional Participants Committee met on several occasions over the last few months to draft this plan. It's been available on the internet. There was out for public comment. There was some public comments received, and there was quite a bit of work that went into it from a lot of agencies within the MAC-RWM region. In order to remain eligible for Proposition 1 funding, UMRA will be adopting this plan at their next meeting in January. They're asking the same of all of the project proponents and member agencies of UMRA. So that's why I'm before you here today. And the recommendation is that the board approves the plan as released on November 1st of 2018 by resolution. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Any questions of Peter on this? Yes?
I'm just curious, there wasn't any mention of number of customers being affected. You know, is that included in their criteria, or?
Yeah, so we're talking about some of the scoring criteria and things like that. Yeah, so there's sort of an agreed upon group of criteria for which these are scored on. And a lot of those have to do with sort of RWM or statewide related goals. So sometimes you don't score as high. You get some bonus points for things like working in tribal areas or disadvantaged communities. And so that can kind of kick the scores around quite a bit. It is important to note that while these are scored in the plan a certain way, it doesn't mean that those don't still get bumped up to the top of the list if you find a funding mechanism where those projects fit really nicely a lot of times. So while this, certain projects score higher than others, it's not really important in the final say-so as to whether a project goes forward too. So, or gets support from the region as well. So some of those criteria are kind of forced upon you, I suppose.
Any other questions? I'd like to ask you a couple, Peter.
Sure.
On the this $500,000 estimated cost of capital cost for the automated meter reading capability, how many customers would be affected by that?
I believe we have just over 570 in West Point.
Okay, so that's a little less than $1,000 per customer then.
Yeah, and this includes a lot of the sort of necessary infrastructure to kick it off, not just the labor for swapping out meters and things like that. So we've got to bring that into the fold and coordinate it with our existing billing system. So there's some additional considerations for those sorts of things as well.
Okay, now on this meadow restoration and habitat enhancement plan, I see that you're estimating that the plan will cost $290,000. I think Mr. McGreevy could do it for $29,000. So
Sure. So this is mostly associated with a lot of the consultation necessary, going through CEQA, additional, you've got to get a preliminary design and some things like that. I had estimated it a little differently in the West Point master plan based upon something that was given to us by the Plumas Corp group, which was, that estimate for some planning was around $170,000. This is more just to take it to the next level and make sure that there's additional work considerations for going through certain additional environmental processes and some engineering design as well. So,
okay. Will this be advertised out there with this anticipated budget listed on it? Because I think that people will
So
do it for
These are
whatever.
just potential projects.
Well, I know they are, but it just, I don't know, I get overly irritated with consulting fees. They're just-
There's one, there's one point I want
Remember
to,
that mental reservation that you swore to earlier? You should have said that.
It didn't say mental incapacity, it said mental reservation. I don't have any reservation for asking questions, man, oh man. You know, the most stupid question is the one that you don't ask, so.
I did want to point out that most of these projects are not in your CIP right now, so there is that to consider as well. They've just been incorporated into this plan. You know, you're under no obligation to move forward in these projects as they are in that plan. It's just more of getting those in the plan so that they can be funded at a time when the board is ready, so.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
I'd like to move to adopt the Mokelumne Amador Calaveras Integrated Regional Water Management Plan.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Anyone in the public would like to comment on this? Okay, if not,
I would just like to know what the ramifications, and I don't quite remember, ramifications of removal of the West Point Dam.
None.
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 It's not used, there's no plan.
So right now, that plan is in draft form, the draft West Point Supplemental Water Master Plan that I presented in November. If you remember, Jack Scroggs from Castle and Jeff Meyer, formerly of ECOR, now of Western Hydrologists, gave that presentation. They modeled that dam and looked at some of the dry weather scenarios or some of the driest years, and basically showed that in those scenarios, even if you expanded Wilson Reservoir, the watershed itself doesn't provide enough water to include any benefit by continuing to hold on to that dam. So the proposal is to expand the regulating reservoir at a later time where maybe you could capture earlier flows and make use of that over the length of the year.
Okay. All right, Rebecca, would you take the roll, please?
Director Underhill?
Yes.
Director Rademacher?
Yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Zepeda?
Yes.
President Thomas?
Yes. Okay, that motion passes, and that takes us to 6A, old business, update on local forest management initiatives.
Okay, so I'll just stay here, I guess. Thank you for having this item before you. This has been something that had been asked for by the board several months ago. It's just taken a while to get it to you. And if you remember, we had Pat McGreevy here last meeting, and we kind of ran out of time. So he's graciously offered to come back today and give this presentation, just essentially talking a little bit about some of the local forest management initiatives that he's working on. And then I will follow that up with just a brief update on some of the projects that UMRA is doing right now as part of their work on forest management initiatives right now too. So I'll introduce Pat McGreevy. You know him, but take it away from here.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Pat.
Hi. So this presentation I gave to the Board of Supervisors perhaps 6 months ago, I can't remember, and it's slightly out of date, but that really doesn't matter. And so I'm going to go through the slides. I'm going to skip some slides and try to focus on some of the properties that you manage. Please stop me whenever you want if you want to focus in on some of your assets. So this is the interagency collaborators for hazardous fuels reduction, and I will introduce that group here in a second, maybe the next slide. There they are. So this group, there's about 15 groups that are listed up here, and essentially what they are, they call them like dirt foresters. They're foresters that don't sit behind desks, but they're actually out working all the time in the forest. And one of the things that they do spend a lot of time on is prescribed burning. So the nickname, you don't have to remember that big long name, just call them the burners. So they go by the burners. And so you can see the lead burner up there is CAL FIRE. And then you can just read down and get a good idea of who the contributors are. Major contributors are, of course, CAL FIRE and SPI, big contributor. And when you get down over to the right-hand side on the bottom, you see a thing called the Cal-Am Forestry Team, and that's me. And we formed, myself and some other retired folks, all professionals, and most of them are foresters, are registered professional foresters. We formed just before the Butte Fire, and we played a critical role in advising county and both counties on what needs to be done in terms of recovery from Butte. If you remember rightly, right after Butte was tree mortality issue, and we spent a lot of time advising the counties on that too. So what we've morphed into now is a group that grant writers, we look for low-hanging fruit, and we go after money to and try to bring it into Calaveras and Amador County for fuels reduction and forest restoration. We always like to show this slide here. What is that? I think it's 1926, taken over in Panther Creek over up near Highway 88. This is what our forest should look like. This is what John Muir and Teddy Roosevelt walked through when they went to Yosemite. They'd never make it today. The next slide shows what it looks like today. So I didn't do this on purpose, but the left slide is CCWD land in Wilseyville. This is your property, and the right, and this property is the subject of a grant proposal, which I wrote, which I'll speak about in a minute. And if awarded, we're going to turn your property into what looks like on the right-hand side. That's some BLM property in Lily Gap, up out of West Point, and it was masticated in 2010, and it looks like a park, and this is what it looks like today. So hopefully we're going to turn your land into the park that I guess we were going to build 15 years ago. Next slide. Our goal is to reduce the risk of wildland fire devastating local communities and forests in Amador and Calaveras counties through interagency collaboration, and you saw the list of collaborators a moment ago. And this is some fire history going back, I think it starts in 1950, and this is the number of fires this is the area burnt in 5-year cohorts since 1950. So you can see the 4 spikes on the right-hand side of the graph, and they represent the largest fires that we've had in the last 15 years, which I'm going to show you on a map in a second. And of course, the biggest one is Butte Fire on the right. It's interesting that if I were to plot the number of ignitions on the same graph, the number of ignitions stay the same. So what's the problem? The problem is the amount of fuel that's on the ground is increasing dramatically. So each time you get an ignition, what we're really dealing with in terms of suppression is the rate of spread of those ignitions. So in years past, when there wasn't so much fuel, the rate of spread was a lot slower, and our suppression, the first responders could get a handle on it. So the name of the game now is fuels reduction. So we're going through the fires. That's the railroad flat fire. Can't remember the date, somewhere in the 90s. And here's the Old Gulch fire. Here's Darby fire, which I'm going to come back to in a little while. Here's Butte, and here they are all together. So you can see, Bertha, that where you live is it's a squeeze play up there. You guys have been escape artists, and let's hope we can keep it that way. Also, Glencoe is spared, and we'd like to think that it's because in 2010 we were able to put in a few fuel breaks that actually functioned, and I can show you a house that we saved. So so Glencoe, it came within 100 feet of my property. So anyway, we think fuel breaks work. Here's Here's just a map from CAL FIRE, which CAL FIRE rates the whole state in terms of fire intensity, and the whole of Calaveras and Amador County are high fire risks. They're classified as high fire risks. So now here's the distribution once again of the biggest fires in the past, and you can see there's all sorts of colored lines. So, and there's colored lines and colored polygons. And these represent the fuel breaks in Calaveras County today. We're trying to map every fuel break. We got most of them. This map is out of date, but it's continually updated. When you look at the stringers, those on the right-hand side, that's the high country, and practically every ridge has a fire break going down it. The lines are color-coded with purple being a concept. So this is in our plan where we want to put a fuel break. It's a concept until we actually get money from a grant or somehow to start work on it. Green are the fuel breaks that are in development, and red are the ones that are actually installed and functional. This, going up the main ridges, is about to be expanded. That's mostly SPI and Forest Service land. SPI has just made the decision that they are going to now go down, put fuel breaks down all the side ridges. So you can, I guess if I come back next year, the year after, you're going to see rather than just a straight line going up the ridge, there'll be fuel breaks coming off to the side, and their goal is to box off the fires in the smallest units as they can. And this is in response to the catastrophic fires that we've had in the last 2 years, where they've taken big hits. So they're going to give up property, they're going to give up growing area in order to put fuel breaks to save the rest of their trees. So they're really serious about this. So you can also see some polygons, and those are landscape fuel breaks. For example, your property in Wilseyville is a landscape. It's not a long linear fuel break. It's a landscape fuel break, and I'll show you that in a second. Oh yeah, so now I'm going to go to McCollum Hill, and we're just going to make a quick run around Calaveras County. We're going to go up through Glencoe that way, and then we're going to cut across to Dorrington and come down to Murphy's. And this is starting in McCollum Hill, and just quickly, this is the big success story in Butte. So in purple, you can see the Protestant and Catholic cemeteries, and they were connected by CAL FIRE a couple years before Butte by a fuel break, and that's the red tracks that you can see that connects the two cemeteries. Butte came up the canyon from the top of the slide and came up the canyon, and by the time it reached McCollum Hill, CAL FIRE engines were stationed all around that perimeter there. They backlit the vegetation down through that fuel break, and we're able to save McCollum Hill. So it works. So let's go up Highway 26, and here we are with Boston Yale, and that lot we lost 5 or 6 houses or so in Boston Yale, and this is Highway 26, and note there's no colored polygons, there's no fuel breaks whatsoever. So it's not surprising that the Butte fire came roaring out of the canyon and just went wherever it wanted, right across all of that property right there, headed for Mountain Ranch. So here's Rich Gulch. Fire came right. This is all burnt, and here's Glencoe over here, and we were spared. So going up to Glencoe, which is right here, this gets into the projects that we're working on right now. So here is our first project that I applied for money in 2016, and it's called the South Fork McCollum project. I'm applying for a grant right now, next week. This is called the Bummerville project. See, this one is now up to 1,500 acres. This one is at 500 acres. This is the Lily Gap BLM project, which is in and functional, and this one's almost done here. Then you get into SPI lands up here, which they're doing a lot of prescribed burn, and there's Tiger Creek Reservoir, and we're connecting to Tiger Creek Reservoir going across the river, and up into Amador County, where the same effort is going on over in Amador County. So here from the 30,000 foot viewpoint, you can get the picture that we're trying to put, not a skinny little landscape, a skinny little fuel break, running up that's 300 feet wide. These are large landscape fuel breaks that we hope will stop fires going up and down and save our communities. So I'll skip that. I was going to, I guess I didn't. Let me come back to this one here. This is the South Fork McCollamy project. It has 5 phases. First phase was environmental, that's all done. Then the second phase involves the mastication of brush from here to here. This is Highway 26 going across the South Fork McCollamy River over to Independence Road. And the point is to stop fire from going up and down the McCollamy Canyon. And we're going to start masticating this hopefully in January. So we're going to masticate 500 acres in January. That's phase 2. Phase 3 includes the private properties around this BLM land here and this blue area up here, which is CCWD. And that's the West Point wastewater treatment plant. So we hope to masticate that whole plant. And that picture you saw in the beginning we'll take care.
Has this board already given you authority to seek that grant?
Who is?
Our board.
Right now, we've talked, Dave Egerton has given us kind of the authority to at least go through the preliminary grant pursuit efforts with these folks, so.
Okay, I just don't remember coming to the board, but eventually it would.
Yeah, it would have to, as far as just seeking out the grants for fuel thinning on the property and, liabilities and things like that.
Is it not a requirement that you have the property owner's authority before you seek the grant?
I have a letter of authorization from Dave Egerton that went in with the grant application.
If you, that's fine by me, but I'm just saying, generally agencies want to see the controlling authority board act. So I would just double check it and come back to us.
Yeah, there's no work to be done until CEQA and other things are done ahead of time. So before any actual physical work would take place, we would obviously come and have to seek authorization by the board to move forward with anything like that.
So this actually, what you're talking about now is phase 3, and I expect to hear the results from the granting agency in weeks, 1 or 2 or 3 weeks. And this one here, I'm putting in for, the application goes next week, and this also borders some of your properties. So, let's just go straight to Dorrington. So if we move over to the Highway 4 corridor, we have the same kind of program going on over there. If we start at Dorrington, where Bertha lives, there are no field breaks around Dorrington. And so we have been working with SPI. This is the Stanislaus Canyon here, and SPI land is in this yellow here, and that polygon coming down like that is now it's being planned. It is planned. I'm almost certain that SPI is going to log that area and put in a shaded field break next year. I'm almost positive that's going to happen.
Yeah, because they come around Big Trees Village.
Well, That's the only thing I know is that, okay. So then you are lucky that you're next to Big Trees State Park, which has done a heck of a lot of prescribed burning and is some of the safest real estate we have around. So as we come down into Blue Lake Springs, which is this, we have, again, SPI land on the Stanislaus Canyon side, and which was hit really hard by beetle kill. And after SPI took out all the beetle trees, it looks like a shaded field break with only firs left. So SPI's done us a big favor there. And that brings us down to Avery here, which is, we're working, this whole area in here is the Davies Ranch. And we're working with the Davies Ranch right now to put in this purple field break going around there. That grant application goes in next week. And it also includes these 2 polygons here, which are from Forest Service. And then on the other side of the Highway 4, which is right here, we're including the Arnold wastewater treatment plant, which would be a mastication, and there's, Jesse tells me there's 100 beetle trees that need to be taken down as well. Leaving the Avery, and the next place is Forest Meadows, and there was one field break right here in Forest Meadows, and we're adding one here and then one over here. And here's underneath the arrow is your wastewater treatment plant there, and we'll include all that manzanita that's, the grant application includes all that manzanita. So that whole area will be cleaned up, and much more than just along the road in your area. And then really important is coming from down the ridge. It actually goes like this down into Murphy's. It's going to be a 300, no, larger than that, polygon, which is fuels reduction down the ridge heading to Murphy's. And then it's not drawn on here, but there's a large project to masticate a huge amount of brush right up against the Murphy's houses. I'm surprised that has never been treated before.
Pat, quick question. What do you do with the fuel that's removed?
When we masticate, they're going to stay on the ground. So we're going to end up with a layer of mulch. And the layer of mulch serves to suppress further sprouting of the brush of the manzanita. So that's a good thing. And we think we can get 10 years without any need for maintenance while that mulch rots away. And when you're talking about biomass, that would be 8-inch trees or larger. That goes to some biomass facility. Right now, Chips on the land that you sold, Chips over in Wilseyville, they're chipping for that material for landscape chips and animal bedding. And Walensky right now is negotiating with 3 companies to put in the cogen electrical plant. And there's a few potholes involved. It's not going real well this week. So, but you know, you talk to Steve, and he would hope that that plant's operational in 2020, which means that all of the biomass in Amador and Calaveras can be trucked there and consumed there.
Thank you.
So how much does it cost to put this whole plan together, like the sketch that I just gave you? It's $19,000, we estimate, this is really rough, $3,000 an acre times the number of acres, okay? But just give you a ballpark figure. So right now it's $20 million just to get the initial field breaks in. Then to maintain the field breaks would be $1.5 million a year. And, no, excuse me, this $1.5 million a year is to do the linear field breaks. So all total, we need $21 million to install the field breaks that I just talked about. And then the annual maintenance is $1.777 million. You know, a couple of years ago, this used to seem like a lot of money, but not anymore. So the grants that we're putting in next week are valued at around $5 million. You know, a couple of years ago, one of our grants would have been $100,000, and we would have been damn happy to get it, you know. And the reason for that is that here's a couple years ago that there was like $200 million, like $200 million, $200 million available for the whole Sierra Nevada for fuels reduction. Since all the catastrophic fires of the last couple years, I think this year we have like $800 million available for fuels reduction. So all of a sudden, you know, it's hard not to get funded when you hand in a grant. So you say, well, that's really good news. And it is good news that Sacramento is responding. So let's look at it, but now we have a capacity problem. Can we accept a lot of money in Calaveras County and spend it wisely? So on the bottom in the yellow here, we put the capacity of CAL FIRE. So CAL FIRE, you notice it's the flat line. Just because we have more fires around doesn't mean their capacity is going up. And as we know, it's actually going down because in terms of fuels reduction work, because they're now fighting fires 12 months out of the year, and they're busy. They are bringing in 3 fuels reduction teams that they're just forming that'll be placed in Tuolumne and Calaveras County, and that'll help us out a lot. But it's really wrong for our folks in Calaveras County, our supervisors, to sit around and say, this is not our issue. Wildfire is not a county issue. It's a CAL FIRE issue. Or it's the local fire department's issue. The local fire department is trying to keep gas in the tank and air in the tires and volunteers. So we can't depend on anybody else. It's our problem. So here's the amount of money. Where's this thing? There it is. Here's the amount of money that over time that we're able to bring in. And so here's the amount of money that's, say, available right now in Sacramento. This orange line is the amount of money that we can actually apply for. So who are the grant writers? How do you get the money out of Sacramento? You write a grant. How many grant writers you have? You're looking at one of them, and there's Bill Fullerton up at the Fire Safe Council, and we're training 2 really bright women that's retired from industry.
One lives in Millwood.
on Highway 4. I don't know, you know Jill Macheo and Marg Donnelly. And they're writing grants right this minute. They're home writing grants. So we are trying to increase our capacity, but there's only 4 of us, and 3 of us have gray hair and, you know, and a limited future. So we have to do something about our capacity in grant writing. Then down here you say, okay, this is where we stand right now. We're bringing in, if we get the 5 grants that we're putting in next week, that's going to bring $5 million in. Great. Now let's go try to find some loggers. Do we have the folks on the ground that can actually perform this work? And so we need to ramp up at all levels if we're gonna take care of this problem. And the conclusions, obviously, we need to increase the pace and scale. Yeah, you add up all the field breaks and all this effort we're putting in. I need to calculate this. It's probably only 2 or 3% of the amount of forest in our county that needs to be treated. So we need to increase pace and scale. The state's giving us the money. We need to increase our grant writing ability. We need to increase the number of local foresters. Try to find a forester. They all have gray hair too, and they're retiring. So we need local foresters, licensed timber operators in short supply. And finally, your question, we need more facilities to process biomass. There you go.
Well, thank you.
Patrick, before you go away, I have a question to ask you about the mastication equipment. I know that Utica Water and Power last year bought a skid steer with a big masticator on the front of it, but it seems like that would be woefully small for the acreage you're trying to masticate. What do they have on track layers or something on Caterpillars in front of them? How do they
But,
do that?
you know, each piece of equipment has its place. You know, so if you have a flat territory with manzanita this high, the skid steer will mow it down really fine. But the stuff we're going to use is on excavators with a
Oh,
masticator head.
I see.
And there's all sorts of different kinds of equipment, but that's the main piece of equipment.
Okay, are any of those located in the county?
Yeah, Robert Smith in Mountain Ranch has 2 of them. Sullivan Logging over in Mountain Ranch has 2, maybe 3. So we do, but we need more. There's a firm down in Fresno that has 16. So, and then a question you should ask too is how many acres can they treat in a day? And the answer is 2 acres if it's, you know, flat land, and we don't use that equipment on land over 30% grade, so slope. So, yeah, it's a slow process.
Well, thank you very much, Pat.
Sure.
Any other questions for Patrick?
Oh, maybe, let's see what else we got going here.
Okay, yeah, I can just go through this pretty rapidly here. Just wanted to provide the board with an update on some of the other forest management projects that are going on through UMRA. You know, speaking of capacity, some time ago, the UMRA board identified forest management as a policy priority for the local watersheds that they cover. And the work identified by the Amador Calaveras Consensus Group and their Cornerstone Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration projects were identified as local projects that were ideal, and those went across a swath of federal, mostly federal land. So essentially in 2016, UMRA entered into a mastered stewardship agreement with the U.S. Forest Service, and basically this allows for UMRA to act as a lead agency locally and leverage state and federal funds as a result of that. So many of the issues of the past have been associated with fire borrowing. I think we've talked about that before. Essentially, the Forest Service has a limited amount of funds to do fuel thinning or projects, forest management projects. That gets taken anytime there's a fire that happens, and then they become further constrained and those projects don't get implemented. So they've been allowed to use essentially state funding via UMRA and some of the funding that comes out of the Forest Service to actually get projects done. So the Hemlock project is one that has been in ongoing right now, and that covers approximately 14,000 acres in the upper McCalmy and Stanislaus River watersheds. And they've targeted forest restoration treatments covering approximately 10,000 acres. So there's 6 project areas within this Hemlock project, and those being the Thompson, Wolfboro, Pumpkin Hollow, Cabbage Patch, Black Springs, and 4 areas. So there are many partners engaged in potential projects, and UMRA has acted as sort of the contracting entity to move many of these projects forward. Your representative is Director Davidson on the UMRA board, and so he's been a part of a lot of this work over the last few years. So here's the Hemlock project areas. As I mentioned, there's sort of 6 areas that are targeted. They're mostly near Tamarack and the Highway 4 corridor there. And so I can kind of just go through some of the progress of some of these projects right now by UMRA. So Pumpkin Hollow and Cabbage Patch restoration projects, as I mentioned, are ongoing right now. Those are in the upper McCalmy River watershed, which kind of includes the Stanislaus River forest that kind of come to a head at the top there. As I mentioned, I think the Pumpkin Hollow is sort of the blue area, like the lighter blue area, and then Cabbage Patch is the green area right next to that. So far, that is a treatment of approximately 971 acres, It is a fuel break and fuel thinning project with a total cost of $1.11 million, with $500,000 of that money being provided by the Sierra Nevada Conservancy grants under Prop 1. Essentially, right now, the project, as of last month, was about 54% complete. And these are some of the contractors that were hired, some of them local, some not. It was gone through a competitive bidding process to be competitive as well. So, Cabbage Patch, at this point, the contractors were brought on in the summer. However, the work has not been started yet. You know, obviously, we're getting towards the end of.
I just want to note that if you do the simple math, and I'm sure there's a difference in the what they're actually doing, but that's, you know, around $1,000 an acre.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I think that's kind of what we had come up with, yeah, as far as just some of these fuel thinning and mastication projects and hiring those contractors as well. So these are some of the contractors that were hired. I should mention this was provided to me by Rob Alcott, these tables, just last month, so it may be out of date at this point. But that's also sort of an additional amount of acreage, some on forest land and some not. And that is a $1.2 million grant with another $500,000 being provided by the Sierra Nevada Conservancy. The Black Springs Restoration Project, a grant application was just recently submitted, I think possibly at your last UMRA board meeting. And that was in, October 2018. It's a proposed treatment of 1,800 acres. You know, and as we're talking all these acreages, we're slowly getting up to the total 10,000 acres in the first slide I had. But this is mostly focused on fuel reduction treatments, including hand and mechanical thinning and mastication. And that is a $1.725 million total $1 million grant. And the request from the Sierra Nevada Conservancy is $1 million for that project. So that's about what I've got. So just wanted to basically get before you. I think this has been asked for several months now about an update on this, and we just had trouble getting to you in that time.
I just have one question. Are we pretty much engaged with UMRA as much as possible? I mean, is our engagement with them?
Well, I mean, the reason I wanted to bring this to the attention, I mean, this is a huge success.
Right.
You know, and it's an Amarillo County, Calaveras County, Alpine County collaboration. I mean, I don't think it gets enough attention. I think that the county as a whole, I mean, you know, the work that you guys are trying to do is awesome. That's great. It wasn't really what I was looking for, but I'm glad to know what's going on as far as, you know, this report goes. But it really comes to a larger issue of really getting some coordination with the county. Several, you know, Amarillo County, Calaveras County, Tuolumne County. I mean, at some point you get too big, nothing gets done. But, you know, I mean, we started working on forest management almost a decade ago. We had before, you know, a lot of people were here. You know, we had a town hall meeting, and Senator Feinstein's staff was there, and we were talking about forest management issues on the federal level back then. And, you know, it has been federally, it's been enormously slow. I mean, we went 8 years where literally nothing happened, you know, and now there's starting to become some movement. I mean, what I want to take from some of these, you know, things and use some of Pat and his group's knowledge is, you know, if you really want to make an impact on the federal forest lands, we got to make an impact on federal forest laws. And I know that we've had some success through the O'Connell-Dempsey group, you know, because I've sat in meetings with Congressman McClintock when the first draft of the Farm Bill came out. I understand the Farm Bill has come back out again and actually may be adopted, and there's a lot of reasons people don't like it, but the forest management isn't the issue. But there's a lot about forest management in there that we've participated in, trying to change some of these rules to make it. Currently, it's too expensive on federal property to log it, because the studies are more expensive than the product. And so that's why you just don't see a lot of logging going on in the federal lands. No one will purchase it because it's too, you know, it just doesn't make economic sense. So, I mean, we're not gonna fix this thing with grant money. You know, Pat's talking about 1 or 2% of the area that needs fire breaks, you know, and I think they have a very aggressive program. You know, that's terrific. But, you know, I don't know where to go beyond this, but I mean, I look back at, you know, I mean, UMR's making a, you know, trying to make a dent in it. It's a shame in this environment where we have catastrophic wildfires that nobody's talking about these projects, because if you can change the people's minds about preventing some of these catastrophic wildfires, you're gonna finally change some of these policies, you know? But it really has to be a bigger, media-driven effort. And I think at some point, we need to think about that with some of these other agencies and start to go out there and produce some programs or whatever that talks about the new environmental policy that works and that is preventing or could prevent catastrophic wildfires. I mean, you know, it isn't, nobody can deny that the state, you know, I tell people, California's new summer is smoke-filled, probably for the rest of our lives. I can't see that changing in the rest of our lives, certainly not Russ's.
One of the things, wow. One of the things that has
That's elder
changed,
abuse, isn't it, Pat?
one of the things that has changed on the federal level, and I do agree with everything that you just said, Director Davidson, but the omnibus bill last year did provide funding, separate that funding into forest management, from fighting forest fires to preventing forest fires and forest management. And that is one of the things, and that's how when we were in Washington DC last year with our lobbyist and wandering the halls, that is one thing that we found, and I was waiting to see this in action, is that money that has always been used up on firefighting. The U.S. Forest Service has historically, over the past 10, 20 years, got a budget, and they've used up all of their money in fighting fires and had nothing left for forest management. That's just the way it was. Starting this year is where that federal funding is now available for forest management, and it is fantastic here at the end of this year to see that money being put to use and projects starting and boots on the ground and people in the forest, and this many different, not only ideas, but moving forward with actual work in progress. And I can see this continuing. And you're right, that was at the federal level is where it did need to start, and I think it has started, and this is great. And I can see this moving forward in a local paper this week. Yesterday's Calaveras Enterprise, there was a letter to the editor about the need for this, and I think if the writers of the opinion on the opinion page, it was, you know, just laymen from our community talking about the need for doing this forest management. And if they knew Mr. McGreevy and UMRA's efforts and things that are already going on, this is very, very encouraging to see 12 months later that this is where we're at and that money is being put to use. And I can guarantee that there's more money going to be thrown at this problem with the problems we're having in a great example in Paradise that still has hardly been addressed.
Me in particular, have been working with young Davis Harper, the reporter for the Enterprise, ecology graduate from somewhere, Santa Cruz. He's been out with me a lot, and I'm trying to get him to write one article a month on fire and what our community needs to know. And he wants to start writing grants. So his first step, he's going to review the grant I'm writing right now next week. I'd like to say something about funding. Everybody talks about the Forest Service. Everything's focused on the Forest Service. National news, state news, you never hear BLM. As a matter of fact, our communities, that BLM is just a mosaic through all of our communities between the 1,000 elevation to 4,000 elevation belt. That's BLM. The Forest Service is up on top. So we should be concerned more about BLM than the Forest Service, not you. So you go to BLM, and I've been complaining about BLM. They haven't taken care of their land forever. So I've been complaining for the last 20 years, and the answer's the same. We don't have any money, and we don't have any personnel. So one morning I woke up, this is how this got started. I said, well, this is easy. Just go get them some money. And, you know, that leaves the personnel part. So that's how this actually started. And then there's some policy problems, is that I've just spent 6 months trying to get an agreement from BLM to allow CHIPS to hire contractors to go work on BLM land. So yeah, BLM has one forester for 9 counties, one forester. So we need to lobby Congress to support BLM, bring them up to staff, and give them some money.
Let me make a suggestion. You know, a while back, we had a meeting with our congressman, because I've dealt with this down at Cosgrove Creek when California Fish and, I forget, I always get mixed up, wildlife, either way, they wouldn't let us clear anything, but they were pointing fingers at each other. And so the only way to resolve that is you gotta get them in the same room together and make them come to a conclusion. We did that a while back when we started talking about hazard,
10 years ago.
with Congressman Lundgren. And he brought the USDA, several other federal agencies to a meeting, and they all had representation there. And we were able to talk about a list of problems. And that's how we got the redwood tanks replaced, because it was such an obvious hazard mitigation. They had agencies telling us, well, as soon as they burn down, we'll replace them. We're like, well, how about some preventive maintenance? Doesn't that make more sense? And we ended up getting that funded. But I'd like to make a suggestion that in our meetings with the Board of Supervisors, that we take it the next step and get a small group, not a giant field, you know, there's 3 or 4 agencies that need to be there, and have our list of, like you just brought up a great example. One of the questions we would ask is, okay, BLM, what's preventing you from managing your property in our county? Just ask them that directly, because they're gonna point to somebody else in the room and say, well, it's an environmental problem. We can't, you know, and I think that will at least begin to make these guys start to make requests to loosen it up. The county needs to tell them that we're not just gonna wait for our county to burn down. You know, we're trying to be proactive. I know I've been working on it for over a decade. I know you have, you know, and everybody's off on their own little thing, but I think at one point it would be wise to come together and get with Congressman McClintock and Senator Feinstein and have them represented, and I'm certain we can make this happen. But it's just a suggestion, but I would hope that you guys would participate in that and bring a list of your concerns, and we can bring a list of ours and try to move it forward.
Well, that's our goal, and right now we're just starting to put together a small program to lobby McClintock. And
well, see, that's the one thing you gotta understand. We actually have a lobbying budget. We have a lobbyist. We've been working on these federal issues for quite some time, every single year. We're trying to work with the County Board of Supervisors to get them, they finally have a federal lobbying budget. You know, we actually, we had the Assistant Secretary of the Interior out here just a few months ago, and we went on a full tour, showed them the CAL FIRE, the quick response area there. We're trying to seek funding so we can have an alternate water source for them. We showed them Maloney's, and then right after that, they went down to I forget the fire was in Mariposa County, but he met with Zimke right after, spending a day or so with us. You know, we've met him in DC. We actually have phenomenal access, and we need to. I would offer that access to you guys.
But despite what you say, the current administration is not putting any more resources into either BLM or the Forest
So
Service.
you just want to quit?
Pardon me?
So you just want to quit? Or
No.
do you want to try?
Hell no. I mean, I'm trying. So all of our money.
Well, you see, the administration is, and I think that the Department of Interior is completely on the side of managing these forests better. More so than ever.
Our money right now is coming, all of it is coming, it's, what do you call it, cap and trade money.
Well, I'm not talking about what's going to happen in the next year or two. I'm talking about what's going to happen in the next 10 years,
Wow.
maybe 20 years. You know, that's the reality of government.
We're in when it comes to lobbying and doing the kinds of things you're talking about. It's the ultimate answer.
Well, I just make a request that we have a discussion with the Board of Supervisors and see if we can set something like that up. Because first of all, I'd like to highlight the stuff that we're doing with the Upper McCombie Watershed. I know that they have a press release. We need to get a copy of it. You know, if we have to take out an ad, you know, we should do so. But the other thing is when you're agendizing these meetings, if you want something to be in the press, you got to put it at the beginning of the meeting.
And Jeff, in our 2x2 meetings this entire year, we have been looking, they are now represented by the same lobbyists that we are. That was part of our goal, part of our bringing it to them. We've got a list of subject matter that of common interest. Forest management is top on that list. This entire year, we've been talking to them about them.
I'm
We have
making a specific recommendation.
trips planned to
So-
Washington DC at this time. And you're right, but it is ongoing. It's not something that we have to create. It's already in the works.
You know, I think something that we can offer, that's myself and my forester friends, is data, you know, for your lobbyist or whatever we're going to do.
Sure.
Because county doesn't have a forester. Nobody has foresters. And so that's where our strength comes in. We make maps, we know acreages, we know all that stuff.
Well, I'm more interested in the impediments to your progress.
So
That's what I'm interested in.
Pat, before you sit down, I have one question for you. 10 years ago, there were environmental groups, particularly up on the Ebbets Pass corridor, that every time somebody wanted to cut down a tree, they would get out in mass and say, you can't cut that tree down. So has that slowed down any in view of these massive forest fires and stuff that we're having? Has their attitude changed or not?
it's a lot better nowadays. I got to be really careful about what I say. You should go talk to the United States Forest Service in Hathaway Pines and ask them about their dealings with the environmental groups. They've just been hammered lately. And they've delayed, the environmental groups have delayed a big project in Arnold 6 months. So I was at a meeting last month, you know, yelling about pace and scale, you know, and the environmentalists are sitting right next to me. You know, I told them within the next 19 days, I said that those two little old ladies and the old man McGreevy are going to put in 5 grant proposals in 19 days. And it's taken the Forest Service 6 months plus to put together a similar amount of work. So I don't understand the environmentalists. I mean, the place is burning down.
Yeah, billions of creatures are incinerated. Billion, I mean, maybe more. I don't even know how to measure that, but I mean, we're incinerating, you know, every living creature, you know.
Exactly. So they're into
100,000.
monospecific forestry. That means the only thing that counts is a spotted owl, and that trumps you.
Yeah.
Oh, and we're talking about the
Is this going to be published?
the product. It's being recorded.
It's on TV.
The product that's coming out of the forest and what you're going to do with it. The environmentalist approach is leave it there. It's habitat. You can't take it out. Another ridiculous thing. You got dead material that's drying and getting more crisp, and leave it there is not the answer.
So my group goes to a lot of these meetings because we want to support the Forest Service and we want to support BLM, you know, against this onslaught of nonsense.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
Okay, moving right along.
Thank you, Peter.
This next item under old business is 6B, discussion direction regarding funding recommendations for districts' PERS, unfunded pension liability.
Yes, Mr. President, we have invited back Eric Scriven of NHA Advisors. He provided you an overview on November 14th. Your direction was to come back with a recommendation to possibly restructure our unfunded accrued liability through PERS, and that's what he's going to discuss today.
He's one of the most patient men I've seen recently.
Actually, he was very interested in hearing Pat's
Mr. President,
discussion.
members of the board, I think I've gained more than I'm going to be giving to you today, because our firm, we're very interested in trying to understand where we can help with our clients on the WUI, you know, issues and funding, and I mean, but part of it is understand what kind of mitigation projects are out there in the data, just so we can be a, you know, good participant in that process for some of our clients. So sounds like there's a lot going on in this county and adjacent counties that's very encouraging, trend setting, I would say.
Thank you.
We're going to try to be very quick. I know we have one new board member, and at any moment, just please stop me. I'm going to try to match up what we were understanding the objectives were, what we talked about last month, kind of the basic concept, and we did some deep diving on the options, and we've come to one recommendation if the board is interested in what the objective and this being a way to meet that objective. So let me see
Jeff
how I
gave
can-
me an update already
Okay, how-
last week, so.
Oh, all right. So last month, we talked about your unfunded liability, and the fact is it's got an increasing and uneven, actually accelerating payment shape, and then it just drops off in about 15, 16 years. That's not a great repayment shape for a liability, and it does have consequences for budgeting and rate impacts as well. The current plan stats at 74%, and you're projected to increase from $1 million to $2 million over the next number of years as far as your annual payment for repayment on the unfunded liability portion. We did talk about the Fresh Start program that CalPERS offers, which you can just sign up for that and do it, and you're not going to save anything on present value. It's the same interest rate, if you will, that CalPERS currently offers and will offer once they reduce it down to 7%. And your new payments are locked in. What they end up doing is shortening it, so you do save money, but it's all on the back end. And then we also discussed, and we'll dig a little deeper on taking out a portion of your CalPERS unfunded liability with a bond or a loan. So we understand the objectives are to save interest, create a smoother repayment schedule. Don't go too long. 20 years was the direction, or less, if you can meet some of the two objectives. Increase the funding level. You're unfunded. You're at 74%. To increase that funding level to be between 85 and 90%. As we discussed, you don't want to go to 100% funding level because you don't get the credit for it. If they do have a few good years, you're not going to get the benefit of being super funded. So a good place to be is 85 to 90%. Trying to minimize the loan as far as coverage ratios and such. Those are the key things that we identified as objectives. So we looked at, we went deeper on, I think we talked about it last time at length. There's two options really. You can go longer and you'd be using a longer repayment on a loan or a bond, which would be a public offering, or a private placement, which you necessarily have to be shorter. That's what the banks will lend out to. Those were the two types of sales that you could utilize for, we'll just call it a bond or a loan. And then there was two sizes. You could take out the whole amount of your unfunded liability, which is about a little over $10 million. Or you could, what we think of as right size it to gain the maximum benefit by taking out those particular pieces of the unfunded liability that create the hump that you have in your repayment shape, and that's about $5.7 million. So as you can see, we started on the previous summary page. If you were to pursue this, if you think this is a good idea, if you think it makes sense to restructure a portion of your unfunded liability at a lower interest rate, but I did discuss last month that there are a couple of risks related to that. I'd be happy to get into that a little bit more if you'd like me to reiterate those. But if you were to pursue this as a strategy, we think that the lower amount, the $5.7 million private placement where you're going out no more than 20 years, maybe a little bit less, is the way to go. It meets all of the objectives that we laid out up front in the best package. So this is, there's a myriad of ways you can restructure the new loan, but you can see your old payment or your current payment shape in the bars, and based on probably a little bit of a conservative interest rate on the private placement loan, fully loaded with cost of issuance, the orange line is sort of a representation of how you could structure it to level out the payments for the next 17 years or thereabouts, out to 2036. Any question? Should I pause here or stop? Ask any. Are there any questions? This slide right here, in a nutshell, is what you're trying to do. You're trying to save money because the interest rates are 4.5% to 5%. Right now, things look pretty good, but you never know what's going to happen early part of next year. So we're just using 4.5% to 5%, and we're using a term inside of 20 years versus the 7% discount rate, if you will, that CalPERS charges. They're a little higher now, but they're going down to 7% shortly. So that's the comparison, but there is a little bit of timing risk when you give CalPERS $5.7 million. There's what we call reinvestment risk, where if they have a bad year for the first year, for instance, it kind of heightens or amplifies, is the word I use, the negative return, because you're getting a larger amount of money versus chunks each year for the next 17 years. So that's really the primary risk that needs to be on the table. But over the term of the loan, you should be saving money, cash flow, and present value savings. And even if CalPERS has a bad year in the first year or 2 years on their reinvestment, the payment shape that we're trying to produce here, a level payment shape, or however we end up doing it, that result is not going to be defeated by a bad year. Once you restack that, you've restructured your loan.
If we were to do this restructuring, is that the only payment that would be paying to CalPERS other than the current fees that we pay each year with payroll? Would you have to pay this loan plus an additional annual fee
What
to
you've
them?
done is, out of the $10.3 million unfunded liability, think of that as your existing debt with CalPERS.
Okay.
You've taken $5.7 million out of it. And you've structured that $5.7 million with the $4.6 million that you still have with CalPERS. You've structured that to make it flat, the combined payment for the unfunded liability flat. So there's two payments,
Yes,
plus you have your annual normal costs.
Right, your
payment
normal
as well.
cost.
So, I mean, that's,
So after the first 17 years of these payments, is there any certainty of what happens after that? Or is that a
with CalPERS, there's no certainty. Every year you can, I think with certainty, you can assume that the payments are going to change because they add what they call bases each year for their reinvestment experience. So if they have a really good year, you think of the new base would be negative, and it would net out to be a lower payment because they had a really good year on their returns. But if they have bad years, or if they lower their discount rate, which we know is going to happen, then there'll be a base that's sort of added to the whole stack, if you will, that is going to be it'll be slightly more.
But the $5.7 million loan will be paid off in that 17 years?
That's correct. That doesn't change.
Okay, and then, so it's just, after that, it's just CalPERS where they're at with the other,
Right.
the other part of it? Okay.
After that, but also during the next 17 years, they're going to be each year during the 17 years, they're going to, whatever their reinvestment is, which they're currently doing every year now, or if they have any actuarial changes, they'll add that sort of incremental difference as what they call a base, and they'll just sort of layer it into...
To that balance, but not to our payment each.
Correct.
Well, it impacts the payment too.
How can the payment stay level then?
Well, it's going to modify some, but the thing of it is it'll accentuate or accelerate your hump there if it's bad, or it'll make it lower, but the hump is gonna,
Okay.
the hump is gonna stay there without a restructure. You're gonna be flat, or it might get tweaked a little bit with some of this experience that could occur over the next 17 years, for instance. But the idea of the restructure and presumably the savings, you were not going to defeat the purpose, which is restructuring to get a more level, predictable repayment shape overall on the unfunded.
Is CalPERS, can you do this at any point, or are we at a time frame here that CalPERS is only offering to let you pay X amount? You know what I'm saying?
You can give CalPERS money to pay off specific bases. How many? I don't know how many bases you have.
We have about a dozen.
A dozen bases. So you have to pay a discrete base. Whenever you, if you had some cash right now that you wanted to throw at the problem, you know, you could give them $1 million if that was one of the bases, and you could pay that base off, and it would be basically gone. That base would be gone with cash. This is just a way to pay off. There's two bases particularly. There's 17-year bases that create that hump that you have there. And I think importantly, not just to save money between the interest rate difference that CalPERS charges and what you can get in the marketplace right now, I think it is important that you use that opportunity to restructure and remove that hump.
Excuse
Those
me.
are the two reasons that you would entertain that, knowing full well there is a risk by giving CalPERS $5.7 million to pay off those two 17-year bases. But you won't defeat the purpose of the deal as far as restructuring for savings. So.
One of the attachments is excerpts from the CalPERS valuation report, and if you go to page number 9, it shows you the schedule of the plan's amortization basis. And each base has different values associated with it, amortization periods, whether it's ramp up or ramp down, and that's what makes up our total unfunded liability. And what they're proposing to do is cherry pick the best ones out of these amortization bases that give us the biggest bang for the buck. And that's, if you add those, add up the ones they're targeting, that's where you get this $5.7 million.
Eric, I have a question for you. I think I probably know the answer to this, but I want to make sure that this level payment schedule, it is, I'm assuming that this is, that level of that line is more or less assuming that we don't add any employees. But if we went from approximately 70 employees to say 77, 10% increase, would that, are these payments going to be high enough so that we don't create a worse problem by having underfunded payments on
Well, I
those new
think you're
employees?
talking about two different things. One is your unfunded liability, which largely is with your classic employees, but new employees would be under PEPRA, I think. So you're
Okay.
talking about normal costs that when you add new employees. But
All
as
right.
far as the unfunded liability that you're going to be layering on to your current unfunded liability of 10.3, I think that number is would be projected to be negligible unless there's a catastrophe with CalPERS.
Yes, that is correct. New employees, new hires are not eligible for our classic miscellaneous plan, and that's what these dollars are from. They're either 2% at 60 or 2% at 62, and the unfunded liabilities for those two plans combined at this particular point is about $2,000, because they're not as generous as the existing one. And this is, yes. And as Eric said, we will experience higher normal costs. That's the cost based on our salaries that we provide, and that's what PERS bases a normal cost on. But as far as UAL on those two plans, it will not be to this magnitude.
Okay. Thank you.
I can go through the rest of it if you like. We summarize the options, the overall savings.
I think the next slide would be very helpful.
Which one? The,
There's a savings.
oh, okay, yeah. I mean, the interest rate assumption, 4.5% to 5%. Total payments over the full term of the comparison between the 5.7 bond, if you will, or loan, versus 5.7 portion of the paid off UAL, $20 million versus 18.3. So total savings is 1.7. The total savings through 2036 is 2.2. Average is $80,000 to $90,000 per year. The PV is $600,000 to $900,000 present value savings, which is 10 to 15% on a net present value basis based on the unfunded liability that you're paying off, which is the standard way you do a comparison. That's a very high refinancing metric. Usually when you're trying to do a refinancing, this is different because there is some variability with what your, the unfunded liability with CalPERS versus if you're paying off old fixed rate debt. But usually 3 to 5% is sort of a threshold level, so 10 to 15% NPV savings is a pretty good number. And the annual payment for that $5.7 million as it stands now is about $700,000 to $1.2 million as it ramps up to the hump. Whereas you can fix it at any level you want, but we picked a line, said we're just going to go flat for that full 17, 18 years, and that comes to $900,000. If you wanted to trim it so that you stepped into it a little bit, instead of going $900,000 next year, for instance, you can tailor it to any way you want. But if you take a little bit lower payment in the early year, then of course that flat line is going to slightly go up. So those are the trade-offs. We can run a myriad of scenarios, as I said before, but this is kind of what it looks like. It's the basic concept in the business decision before the board.
And this is something that we would get the loan now and not have a payment until July, or get the loan in July of our next fiscal year?
We don't have it budgeted. It's not budgeted.
Right, for the payment.
It is not budgeted at this particular time. The next two slides talk about next steps in the process. And as Eric said, we can design it to have the payment start at any particular time going forward. Generally, what you're looking on bonds or debt is the principal and interest payment is in September, whereas you have an interest payment in March, but it all depends on what we kind of scope out.
So is this unique to our district?
As far as pension bonds, I mean, this is
No, I
pension.
mean the deficit.
No.
Statewide, some are much worse than
What-
others.
what figure this?
$10 million unfunded liability is not a huge number, but I think it's when you put it in context, you're at 74% funding level. I think I've seen a stat somewhere where statewide, I think we're lower on a funded basis. The whole state, if you took, because the state, as we know, is, I don't know, 50 billion or is it hundreds of billions of dollars unfunded for state employees. City of Stockton was $400 million unfunded. So it's all relative to, your organization. So, but it's statewide. I mean, it's in the news pretty much every week that this is.
Well, I mean, it's the state, they're offering to give us the money at 7%.
That's what they use, that's what they charge, basically, yeah.
This is funny.
This is very similar to when we refinanced our side fund loan, our PERS side fund loan back in, I believe it was 2012. And they were charging us 7.5% at the time, and I think it was like a $2.2 million amount. We paid it off, and then we had, I think the rates at that point, obviously during the recession, were low, and we paid 2.98%. And we went through a private placement through a bank.
I think we're fortunate that Jeff continues to look at these things and finds ways of saving money and refinancing these situations that we've got ourselves in. And from what I understand, it is very common. But to save annual savings of $80,000 and $90,000 a year, and over the life of this the 17 years of this loan, to be able to save between $600,000 and $900,000 on loan payments by making a move now and guaranteeing it, put us in a much better financial situation. And with the fact that both of you guys have said that there's a myriad of ways of approaching this and thousands of ways to put this together, I'm sure you put your heads together and found one that will work for us, that makes sense. And picking something out, I think this is, you're looking for direction from the board.
Well, and I would like to make a comment to that, because as I said, there's a myriad of ways, and I know usually it's best to be quiet when you know, but I want to make sure, because this is kind of a complicated, there's news out there about pension bonds, right? There has been news out there, and some people have been unhappy, so you need to have the discussion thoroughly about, as I've said a couple of times, when you give them a slug of money. But some of those pension deals that have been done in the past, they basically took that shape, and it was just like a regular refinancing, where they took that shape and they just shaved a little bit of money each of those years, but they did not take a more comprehensive approach, which is what I advocate, which is restructuring this so it meets sort of a deeper business objective for the district, which is to have a more predictable repayment shape on your unfunded liability. And you can achieve this, and it won't be defeated with some of this future potential experience. So
when we talked
I
about this,
wouldn't recommend shaving each year.
Right,
I don't think that achieves much, but this I think does.
Yeah, that straight line is something that we're really what we're really looking for is some stability and knowing what our expenses are going to be next year and the year after that, and not have that keep going up and having to dig. I mean, the budget, putting the budget together when you know you got more next year than you got this year. Right. For what reason you got that much more money in rates coming in, and the other funds that we're looking at, additional funding besides rates. This seems like I mean, what I started to say, with the myriad of options that we have, the right. Thousands of ways to put this together, there's got to be I'm sure this is probably one of the best ways, and there's probably a bunch of different ways, and depending on what things that even change in the next week or months, this may or may not work as best as another option might have. Mm-hmm. But I'd say that let's continue on and pull the trigger and get started on this. Now, Jeff did point out about our budget. If we did start this before a new budget year, a budget adjustment would be need to make if we did take this loan and started payments on it. How would that work?
Actually, because the cost of issuance is rolled into the loan, there would be really no dollars spent out of the district funds at this particular point in time.
That's correct. This is all, which is a typical financing.
Yes.
We have all the costs structured into the deal.
And if we look at the last couple slides, we're looking at maybe a March close, and if that's the case, I don't think it'll impact this year's budget. However, I do want to make one point, and Eric, if you could go back, I apologize, if you could go back to the slide with the hump, there. If you look at the early years, we will be paying more in the first couple years due to the ramp up of costs if we keep that level line. So there will be a challenge there, but the overall savings will be greater. Or we can go ahead and ramp up in the early years to kind of mirror that graph and have less savings. There's one option. We can ask NHA and their modelers to present two different options to see what the costs associated are, the savings, and then we can go from there. because it will have an impact on the next 2 or 3 years' budgets if we do that model. I just want to be fully open and transparent with your board on that.
Do we have an estimate of costs for putting this package together?
We can get that, but we don't have that right now, no.
No. And that, if your board directs us to go forward, we'd be coming back in January with that, because we'd have to reach out to bond counsel, and not only the bond, but disclosure counsel, the placement agent, and the financial advisor. So you'd have 3 different parties that would be associated with this.
Right, there may be some small bank fee.
Yes.
Well, I'd like to kind of draw this to a conclusion here. Is there any member of the board that has any dissatisfaction with what's being presented here?
No, I like
Okay.
the straight presentation. I mean, it's all
I just have
condensed
a
and.
couple final questions.
Sure.
I don't have any issue with the direction we're heading, I'm just trying to get, so this is a result of us not paying enough in for these pensions.
This is yes, and bottom line, that's it. We're paying what PERS tells us to pay, but it's not enough to keep things going based on their investment returns and their actuarial assessments.
Okay, and so they just gave us this report to say you're not, or did they just, is this just a way for them to clean up their stuff, and so they sent out something that says, hey, we're gonna make this offer to you? Have we known that we were in a deficit for quite some time?
Yes, and what's really sparked this is when PERS changed their discount rate from 7.5 targeting down to 7, that really bumped up our future UAL costs. Before that, they were growing slightly. Now they're going up like you see there. So
I'm not recommending this, okay, but is there just absolutely no talk about taking more out of people's checks?
that would, based on PEPRA and the PERS legislation, we're maxed out as to how much we can take out of people's checks. And now that would be a negotiated item if we want to go back to the union for that.
Now, the other question, isn't there a Supreme Court case going right now that
I think they heard that yesterday or the day before, wasn't that in the last week? On the
Yes.
California rule? I know, I don't have any word on that either.
Yes, they did, and there's a couple more cases coming before the board. Now, one of the other things,
We don't know that they haven't ruled on it.
no. The other thing, as far as we can look at too, the other obligation, retirement obligation, is our retiree health, our OPEB. Now, that's totally open to negotiation. There's no state rules governing if we can require employees to contribute on that. And that, actually, there's a reopener language in the current MOUs that allow us to come back and discuss that.
I was also wondering how forthcoming we've been with the employees about this, about the burden of cost. But anyway, that's not on the agenda either.
Yeah.
This was shared along with the OPEB when we went through MOU negotiations with the SCIU last time. I presented that and spent significant time explaining this to them. But not this recently.
Okay. Your question about the court case that has been filed recently, how would that affect this one way or the other, depending on the outcome?
It was heard, yeah, it's actually been heard in the last week, and it's a big.
They're expected, it basically,
Yeah.
and we have attorney here, I'm just a contractor, but from what I understand, it would give the state the ability to reduce benefits, if I'm not,
It depends on the interpretation or the decision by the Supreme Court. This one particularly looked at the airtime, the purchase of airtime, which was taken away due to Brown's PEPRA. So employees can no longer buy airtime. That's what was challenged. There's two other cases, I believe, Marin and Alameda, that are also up in front of the Supreme Court that could possibly change the interpretation of pensions, about guaranteed pensions going forward. Is that correct?
That's correct. I assume this is a way for the municipalities not to go bankrupt.
Right.
To prevent bankruptcy, is that what they're trying?
Well, there's various, I mean, they've never been able to, they've always, in California, you've never been able to really mess with somebody's pension, it's almost guaranteed. And so there's a question of whether they can first question, how they rule on the most recent case could have a broad impact, or it could simply just deal with airtime, depending on how they rule.
Right.
And that's gonna give them indication of what people think will happen with the other ones. But yes, it's whether you can adjust them for reasons like this, and that agencies have this huge debt now.
Okay, well, my conclusion is that you have your direction, as broad as it may seem, but we'd like to continue with this and come back in January.
Just one more comment, as you do bring it, when you do bring it back to us, is there just gonna be one, this is what we decided on? Or I think you said it might be a slight option?
I'm going to have discussions with Eric and his modelers, but I would like to see two different options. Because obviously, if we go flat line across there, the challenge is how to fund it for the next couple years.
Right.
And so I want to be able to show two different options, ramp up and the total cost there, mirroring that, or flat line. And then that will give your board the opportunity to make an educated decision.
Okay. Good plan.
Jeff made a comment earlier about how I'm not likely to see the outcome. So I just want a request that let's not use that term flat line. Can we come up with something different?
By the way, shouldn't we have those machines that you defibrillator? We need to get a defibrillator there.
I got one right here.
Oh, man, I'll go probably before you.
That was an elder abuse type of thing you said there.
Thank you for the robust discussion on fire.
Thank you for hanging in there.
Yeah.
Would you like to come back? You could come back when we meet with the county. You can come back. Okay. We are, believe it or not, we're at General Manager's report.
For sake of getting us out of here very quickly, I'm going to defer a couple to January's meeting, but I do want to remind the board and the public, there's a Finance Committee meeting next Tuesday. That's December 18th at 11 a.m. And there was a handout in your packets on the dais today about the Exhibit 1 of our rate ordinance. President Thomas, then Director Thomas, requested that we look at possibly adding a new column under the tiered rate structure to show what our rates are, not only per CF, but per gallons on the individual tiers. And this is what it would look like. I've talked to Sean Korn of HDR and Matt as well, and I can defer to Matt, but in general terms, if we want to go down this road, we should probably adopt a new ordinance as this is with a new exhibit.
Yeah, if you wanted to add this to our ordinance, you would have to you don't have to do the 218 process again, but you would have to redo the ordinance, which is publishing it, waiting the 60 days, and going through that process to approve an ordinance. As opposed to, I mean, you could probably make this available in other ways that would be easier than that, but if you want it to be part of the ordinance, we will have to adopt a new ordinance.
Well, I think it's already, as I learned after I spoke with you, that it's already on the website, that there's a new tab on the website or certain information that clarifies how many gallons there are at these various levels. And what else is on the billing? There's just a note that how many gallons there are in a cubic foot.
Yes.
But I don't know. My objective in making that recommendation is that I think that we could do a much better job of eliminating confusion on the part of our customers. Nobody can convert in their head when they read how many cubic feet that they've used, and their bill has gone up $40 in that billing period. So I think that we owe it to our customers to give it to them in terms that they understand. And so that's, unless people on the board think that there's something wrong with that. I mean,
You know, there's only so much you can do. I mean, if it says, you know, it's 7.4, what is it, 7.43?
49.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, do the math.
Get a converter app on your phone.
Yes, and I can understand giving them the information, but it just brings more confusion.
But if we want to agendize it, we should.
Yeah.
We don't have to discuss. I mean, if you
Okay.
wanna discuss it further, we have to agendize it. I think
All
Jeff
right.
has to give you information.
It's the engineering committee, maybe.
Yeah.
All right, let's agendize it for the engineering committee. All right, does that conclude your report, Jeff?
Yes, it does.
Okay. We have board reports. Director Underhill, can we start with you?
Yes, I'll make this quick. We received a letter from the scholarship coordinator. We're getting ready to do our scholarships, and, you know, she looks forward to seeing us on Scholarship Awards Night. I would like to throw out the idea of including our continuation schools. Because, you know, it's not that, you know, life happens, and so they have to put away or put aside their school, and they can't go, but they're coming back, and it's not that they're any less dedicated than the ones who are able to continue through high school and no problem. I'd like to give that some consideration. Let us think about how we could include our continuation high school graduation, to give them some money.
Good suggestion.
Okay, and then, last night, we had a very large town hall meeting in Ebbets Pass, put on by the Ebbets Pass Fire District, because their current budget was, they're down over $400,000. So it looks like they're going to be making plans to have some kind of assessment up in Ebbets Pass, but it was very successful, you know, because people understand, you know, you don't have your fire protection, you're out of luck. And so it was very favorably met, and they'll be coming back with more specifics.
Bake sale.
Pardon?
Big sale, golf tournament.
Oh, yeah, okay, and then from one end to the other, I'd like to pass a card on down to Cindy that was signed by the entire board. Welcome. I did it.
Oh, thank you.
Welcome and congratulations.
Thank you.
Here, here.
Okay.
Are you through?
Uh-huh.
Okay, Director Ratterman. Get used to that.
Next week is, as Jeff mentioned, we do have our finance committee meeting here. It's been changed to 11 a.m. for what I understand. And that's, we, on the following day, Wednesday, a camera is in the room here. Camera will be meeting at 2:30. And then on Monday, the 17th, so that's, Monday the 17th, we start our general manager interviews. So we've got a lot going on next week. That's all I got right now.
Jeff?
I have nothing.
Cindy?
Well, I don't have anything on committees yet, but looking at the future board meetings, I'll be attending the Western Water Summit down in San Diego on the 22nd and 23rd, so I won't be here for the January 23rd meetings. Other than that, I'm all scheduled for you.
Okay. We might consider taking our board down there so we could, where's the meeting gonna be held?
It's in San Diego, I can't remember the name of it. It's the Western Water Summit.
Hey.
It's the first one here, and they have 4 good topics from recycling, going green, and water rights law. And so I'm going with, as a MSD representative. So it should be pretty interesting.
Okay, well, I don't think any,
Bring back what I learned to you.
Perfect.
no takers on my idea of taking our meeting down there for you. Okay, I guess that leaves me, and the only thing I want to talk about is, again, about the Aqua meeting that I attended in San Diego. It was really wonderful. I enjoy going to those, and they're very educational. And what I brought back was, and I made copies for everybody, is David Egerton's new business card. So,
You couldn't even get us copies?
huh?
He only gave you one?
Yeah, he only gave me one. But
But you got colored copies.
yeah, it's a colored copy. But I want to make sure, I'm absolutely certain that everybody understands how fortunate we are to have Dave in Sacramento. And he emphasized time and time again during the process of meeting up with him down there that he will not forget us. And he
Did he say our name out loud?
oh yeah. He did, in public, yeah.
You still have a closed session, right?
Yeah, I know. But anyway, use the numbers, and he said call him anytime. So, okay, now we have a closed session. Well, first of all, I want to reemphasize that we have a next meeting December 17th. It's a special board meeting for what Scott talked about, the general manager interview. And then Wednesday, January 9th, we'll be talking about the committee assignments that I neglected to mention earlier, that I don't want to try to do that now without input from you. So I would recommend that you communicate with Rebecca about what assignments that you would prefer to take. And then I can talk to Rebecca about that and can give it due consideration. And then finally, the January 23rd meeting, and we'll miss you, Cindy. Okay, closed session. We have a conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation pursuant to subdivision D, paren 2 of Government Code 54956.9, one potential case. And then we have another public employment, general manager recruitment, Government Code 54957. Public comment on these? No.
We should ask for public comment on the.
On the meetings?
Liability item too, while you're in.
The public liability?
The unfunded liability discussion, we had 6B. You should ask for public comment on that as well.
I'm depending on our public to wave their hand. Okay, so we'll be back to report.
Do we stay here and everybody else leaves?
Yeah, usually go.
Oh, we go in the other room?
Oh.
Oh, that was my husband out there. I told him to leave.